You and I are predetermined nonsense, and that's okay. You and I have predetermined consequence, and that's okay. And that's okay. You and I are locked into our destiny, and that's okay. And that's okay. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. You and I, predetermined nonsense. You gotta, and that's okay. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. You gotta, and that's okay. You gotta know what you want. Look out. You gotta know what you want. Look out. And I are predetermined nonsense, have predetermined consequence. You and that's okay. You and predetermined nonsense. Look out. And that's okay. You gotta know what you want. You gotta know what you You and I are locked into our destiny, and that's okay. And that's okay. I remember the days when someone could be wrong. I remember the days when thinking out loud won't get you shot down. I remember the ways we used to call out, hey, hey, hey. So don't forget to call on me to disagree. So don't forget to call on me to disagree. You now reduce them to the evil you once agreed. You want to reduce them to be silenced. you once agreed. So don't forget to call on me to disagree. So don't forget to call on me, yeah, to disagree. Your ship is sailing on. I see you on the horizon. Your ship is sailing on. I see you sailing on the horizon. Call on me when you wanna disagree. Please call on me when you wanna disagree. You now reduce them to be silenced. You once agreed. You and I are predetermined nonsense. Closing sale, everything must go, nothing left behind, no wild oats to sow. So out of my way, I'm done now. You see, you took the meat, but not my bones. Now throw away your key. One foot out the door, persistent. You are frozen in time. Oh, I love you slips out of my mind. So sail, set sail, a little bird. Just go and set sail. Set sail, set sail, a little bird. Just go and set sail. I'll take my ship away as the storm rolls in. I hope the wind is with me, and I hope you've learned that the pirate within me is sworn to the truth. Live or die by this rule. Something old and something new is the treasure within me. As sad as it seems, you will come to know what it all means to me. Set sail, little bird. Just go and set sail. Set sail, little bird. You just go now and set sail. Some pictures and some memories, ones I can't forget, on the crest of my black heart. You best not forget that the pirate never loses. He always collects one way or another. Now you can clear up all your regrets of the time you set sail with that pirate from the sky. You will remember him until that day that you die. Set sail, set sail.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the War of Ideas, episode 34. Today, we are talking about Jordan Peterson and whether or not he has been well and truly canceled by CP Ontario, the College of Psychologists. There is going to be no camera today because last week we had some connection issues, and I think that transitioning over to this medium will make our experience smoother and more enjoyable for everybody. And also, you guys won't have to look at my ugly mug, so that's always a plus. However, next week we'll be back to our normal, wonderful setup. However, I could not wait till next week to talk about this because this is a very, very interesting topic. So, we are going to open up with the normal opening monologue for 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to allow the conversation to grow organically as it usually does. So, the first thing that everyone has to understand is what exactly happened here. Essentially, a few days ago, Jordan Peterson made it public that the College of Psychologists of Ontario were trying to re-educate him. People on the right are calling this, mandatory re-education. We're kind of evoking 1984 type language. The College of Psychologists of Ontario are media retraining. Essentially, they feel that Peterson has not been acting in accordance with his license on social media and in his public conduct, and they want him to submit himself to a mandatory retraining, or he will have his license as a clinical psychologist pulled. Peterson has lashed out against this, as you might imagine. He thinks it's petty. He thinks it's arbitrary and capricious. He thinks that the attacks levied against him don't hold water and that this is a thin veneer of just a political attack. CP Ontario thinks that the complaints are legitimate. They think that he's broken some rules. At least that's what they're arguing. And they think that he has to submit himself to this re-education. Peterson has said that at the beginning, he said that he was willing to lose his license to avoid re-education, although he's also said that he'd be open to doing a re-education if he has various questions answered and if he can film the whole thing and make it transparent for the public to see. CP Ontario has not been engaging with Dr. Peterson on Twitter whatsoever, despite his numerous attempts to tag them and start some sort of dialogue. There is a good amount of source material here. We have around 55 pages that Dr. Peterson put out on Twitter regarding he put it out on January 4th regarding their conflict. Full disclosure, I am somewhat on Peterson's side here. But I also think that this issue is a lot more complicated than you think it would be on the surface. So we're going to go through the 4 questions that I think we have to answer in order to fully understand this problem. So question number 1 is this a good thing in the abstract? Is Dr. Peterson getting held, having his feet held to the fire by the College of Psychologists of Ontario? Is that a good thing in the abstract? So don't think about whether he actually violated any rules. Don't worry about if this is pragmatically helpful. You just kind of have to think about this is kind of a litmus test for how you feel about Dr. Peterson and his language and think if he needs to be reined in or not in general. Obviously, these 4 questions are interrelated, so your answers to these questions are going to affect the others, but I think separating them is useful and will make our thinking a little bit more precise. The second question is, did Dr. Peterson actually violate any rules of CP Ontario? That's going to be the big question that we focus on. There's an argument, I think, for one rule that he broke. There's arguments for multiple, but the only one that I think holds water is one particular rule where he may have presented himself as having some expertise that he doesn't actually have. I think, there's many hours of Dr. Peterson talking, and he said that he was an evolutionary biologist. You could use that as a technical term in terms of his actual expertise, or you could just talk about it like where his head's at. You could argue that that's kind of improper presentation of his field of knowledge. There's some other rule breaks that are alleged, but that's the one that holds the most water to me. The third question is, if he did do a rule break, are these rules good? Are these rules things that CPO, that the College of Psychologists of Ontario should be enforcing? Are they things that they should have their purview cover? or is this purview much too broad? This is something Peterson has argued, that he's like, look, guys, if this language falls under your purview, there's no such thing as language spoken publicly that doesn't fall under your purview. That's one of his arguments, which is actually a good test, because when it's coming to things like this, whether it's professional or not, or whether it's professional or private in the sense of not being professional, not private in the sense of being within your own home. The problem with that is that the CPO gets to kind of define what counts as professional. It's kind of up to them. And an argument to attack that is something Peterson has said, which is, look, if your definition of professional is so all encompassing that it basically destroys what private would qualify as, it's because your definition is wrong and too broad. So that is the question number 3. Are these rules actually good? And then the fourth question, which I think is the most interesting, is this helpful? So let's say that the rules are good. Let's say that he actually did violate them. Is this enforcement? Is this way of going about it a useful way of going about it? So this is one of the most interesting arguments that Peterson put forward, is that he regulates himself pretty publicly and pretty stringently. He has his own network of people who don't all agree with him, trying to moderate his behavior, and that this is unproductive, unhelpful, and is necessarily punitive. He thinks it's basically public humiliation, and even if you grant the first 3 questions, it's still not helpful, since he's doing as much self-moderation as could be reasonably expected. So those are the 4 questions. I think that if you answer no to any one of those questions, I think you're going to have a hard time being on CPO's side on this. But depending on how many questions you answer yes or no, you're going to come down on various levels of harshness. So if you have not noticed, I am pretty much on Dr. Peterson's side here. So I'm not going to pretend to be objective. I will play devil's advocate if I have to, because it's fun and it's good for your brain. But in this show, I'm going to be a little bit more of a defense attorney for Dr. Peterson, because I think that basically they have some weak tea. So we're at the point now where that is the opening monologue. We are going to open the show up to callers. So if you guys want to call in, please do. In the meantime, I'm going to go through this record that Peterson put out on his Twitter. You can find it. It's public. I'm going to drop it in the call-in very quickly. It is essentially a summation of all of the complaints levied against Dr. Peterson, and therefore the complaints are the alleged rule breaks, that kind of thing. Yeah, we're going to be doing some of that. So, is my audio okay still? Yes? I'm assuming yes. Okay. We are going to go to the report. So I dropped the link in the chat so you all can follow along. I'm going to breeze through this very quickly. Essentially, there's numerous complaint forms against Dr. Peterson for doing various things. So this first complaint is on page 4. It says that it is against this complaint is upset with Dr. Peterson for apparently encouraging suicide. So this is actually a complaint that I think is probably the second most important in terms of holding water. To whom it may concern, this person says, this anonymous complaint, this was given out February 16th of 2022. He says that it is against every ethical standard and best practice of the U.S. National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics to make light of, encourage, joke about, or reference the topic of suicide in a manner not grounded in safety, prevention, and evidence-based therapeutic intervention. I'm sure that Canada's standards of professional psychology and social work are similar. I'm submitting a formal complaint, not only for Dr. Jordan Peterson's original tweet, but for the fact that he just shared it again, promoting the idea that what he did was perfectly fine. Okay, so what is this evil tweet that apparently was making light of or encouraging suicide in some way? Of some way. Well, essentially, there was a tweet put out by Roger Palfrey who says that based on the record of human behavior, we are already overpopulating this small world. Any arguments I have heard for supporting such a large human population completely overlook the huge loss of species and ecosystems resulting from our self-absorbed attention. Dr. Peterson retweeted this, and he said, "You are free to leave at any point, period." So this complaint is interesting because you could not argue that he is encouraging anything. This is a statement of fact. Technically, you are free to leave at any point. You can technically kill yourself. This is just a statement of reality. He is not making this point in a serious way, serious mental health way. He's more making this point in terms of political way, just kind of harping back on the anti-human type of attitude put forth here. Um, however, However, you could argue that since he is a clinical psychologist, that this is not appropriate for him to do. Um, in defense, Roger is not a client. Roger, as far as he is aware, isn't mentally any point of mental weakness. Again, he's not encouraging anything. He's basically just stating a fact that he is free to leave at any point, and he's doing it for the tongue-in-cheek manner of politics. It's not a recommendation in his clinical capacity whatsoever. So you can make that defense. All right. Before we get to the next complaint, before we get to the next complaint, I'm going to talk about Dr. Peterson's response to this particular complaint because he responded on Twitter way before this whole hullabaloo started. But then I will go to Sheila, who is waiting patiently in the callers. So Peterson said this, and then he retweeted it. He said that I am being investigated by the Ontario College of Psychologists because of a complaint about this tweet, not submitted, by the way, by the person I responded to. I refuse to defend myself against such things anymore. It takes days of work to mount such an offense. He retweeted again. He said that there's 6 months until the investigation reaches its conclusion. He was right. 18 pages of background information to sift through. I'm done with it. I'm not defending myself against such accusations anymore. The process is the punishment, and those who levy complaints, which must be investigated, know this full well. And I'm not participating in it anymore. Take my license if you must. At this point, it would be a relief. And if anyone who considers me their enemy and thinks I'm an unethical psychologist wants to register a complaint against my behavior, here's how to do it. Just use this email, cpo@cpo.on.ca, and tell them what I have done wrong. I've helped perhaps millions of people with my lectures and books, etc., but any one person anywhere can complain to the college about anything I've done and threaten my licensure, smear my reputation, and tie me up in red tape. No more. So at this point, Peterson basically refused to defend himself because he thought that the work was the punishment, and he thought that the whole system of any random person being able to complain at any point for any reason is somewhat ridiculous. Again, the person who he said this to did not complain. So that's his response. That was his response at the time. Now, 6 months later, like he said, it's kind of blossomed into something that he is dealing with to some degree. But we have a caller named Sheila who's probably going to say things much more interesting than what I'm saying. So, Sheila, welcome to the show. Back. I'd love to get your take on all this. What you thinking?
Hey, can you hear me all right?
There's some background noise, which is not my favorite, but yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll do my best. I'm on the road. I'm driving to the border at the moment.
Which one?
The U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna do some kind of follow-up after the cosmetic theater is gone. Let's see what it actually happens.
Yeah, I mean,
So
this is kind of off topic, but yeah, Biden visited the border for the first time in 2 years, and maybe changed his policies a little bit in a kind of incoherent way. But whether or not that changed anything, yeah, probably good to look into. My guess is no. What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you just briefly. For the last, 25 years, maybe longer, everybody seems to think that immigration law is subjective based on presidential fiat. So instead of just enforcing the laws that we have, they've been manipulated by State Department, trade deals, and the bargaining and hassling over labor. They never quite ever really kind of coordinate things with the visa department properly, so that you can broker labor deals with each country for migrant or seasonal labor, and then they go home. We used to do those sorts of things, and there are visa expulsions that do happen, but that would put the onus much stronger on the State Department to do enforcement work of migration in this country. Okay, right now it's squarely in the hands of DHS, which never seems to really be able to kind of do. They're kind of hamstrung between it.
Sheila. Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? All right. Yeah, Sheila, you're breaking up a little bit. Everyone can hear me, but Sheila's breaking up. All right, I'm not the problem, thank God. Sheila, yeah, I can't hear you. I think it's because you're on the road, so this was expected. Yeah, I was gonna ask you about your opinions on Peterson, but seems like you want to talk about something else. So also since I just can't hear you, we're gonna move on to Lance here. Sheila, if you want to call back, you are more than welcome to do so. Please hop back in that carousel. But for now, we got Lance. Yeah, Sheila's broken robotic. Yeah, sorry. Hey Lance, what's up?
John, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. What are you thinking? Had a little bit of a
Yes, I can hear you.
had a bit of a scare there.
Can you hear me?
For somehow Sheila is talking, even though she's in the listeners. I have no idea how that's possible.
The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, Lance, just tell me what you're thinking about the whole Jordan Peterson thing. We got like 4 questions on the table. I think we'll have one answer.
Well, you know what?
So they don't want to expense the state, so they
Sheila, you're not even in callers. Sheila, please mute, all right? If you want to hop back into callers if you want. I have no idea how you're talking right now. Colin's bugging out a little bit. Yeah, Lance, if you could tell me what you're thinking, please do.
It's voodoo.
Yeah, it really is, right? Like, that should not be possible at all. But yeah. We got 4 questions.
This is hilarious because what Jordan Peterson. Okay, I'm not a fan. Okay, fine, big deal. But he's very smart. He's just not. He's not. First of all, in other words, I think he reveled in this whole thing before with the controversy about his statements about the pronoun thing. But they're messing with the wrong Marine. They're messing with the wrong Marine here. Okay, so in other words, I don't dislike Jordan Peterson. I just disagree with him on stuff. I think that he always talks about studies, but he never says which one. Whatever.
Lance, you're cutting out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. How's that now?
Is it okay for you guys?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
No, you're better now.
Okay.
You were cutting out for a
second. All I'm saying, was that. Oh, okay. Was that they're messing with the wrong Marine here. Whatever I think of my personal opinion of Jordan Peterson, this is exactly what he lived for this. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Oh, he's going to, get clicks on it. Good. I hope he does. I hope he makes $1 million selling a book about it. I really mean that because this is insane. Did you hear on Jimmy? I think it was on Jimmy Dore. It doesn't matter. He had a long clip, about 5-minute clip. Oh, no, it was on Russell Brand, who I adore. In fact, Jordan Peterson is a huge Russell Brand fan, interestingly enough.
Yeah,
anyway, he had a whole thing about
very weird.
Yeah, about Justin. That's why I respect Jordan Peterson. It's more like disagreements. And guess what? He's trying to make a living and create an image with all of that, like stagecraft when he went over to Talking Points or whatever it was, Daily Wire. It's hilarious. Anyway, I don't care. Who cares? Yeah, I respect the man and all that. But the thing with what's his name? On Russell Brand's show, this long thing about Trudeau doubling, tripling, quadrupling down now about what they did with the truckers and freezing their assets. Even after having to admit, the government had to admit, as I'm sure you know, that it was all no violence, no nothing. But what they're saying is, if you disrupt the economy, that's violence. So they're going to redefine it, and so they're doubling down. They're moving forward with the agenda, even after they had to admit that they were at fault to crack down the way they did with the truckers. He called them misogynists. He called them rapists. He called them everything in the book. He sounded worse than Trump.
Lance, so are you saying? Well, I'm just trying to get it's the trucker stuff that's getting him in trouble. Do you think it's just, or do you think there's something like there's an actual rule break somewhere in there, or do you think it's just political?
I think that between what they're trying to do to Jordan Peterson and what they're doing now, this is today. This is like a couple days ago that he doubled down. Trudeau. This is after the government had to admit that they were wrong, had to admit there was no violence from the truckers.
Yeah.
Okay. Now he's doubling down. So, well, no, we were still justified because if you disrupt the economy is what they did, and that's still violence, and we were justified, and we'll do it again next time. So they're coming with everything now. I think that we're over we've crossed the Rubicon now where they're not hiding it. They're going to go forward no matter what's proven, no matter even if they have to admit fault. It's like, that's right, we were at fault. We're coming after you anyway, even Jordan Peterson. So this is it. This is it. This is the final showdown, I think, as far as Canada right now. That's what it looks like to me. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist or I'm not the guy that's going to wear the sign that says the world.
What do you mean by final? What do you mean by final showdown?
Well, what I'm saying is that they had to admit they were wrong. Trudeau had to admit that their government fucked up in terms of calling it a violent protest or whatever they did to the crackdown. They had to admit they were at fault, that there was no violence. So now, after having to admit that, he's doubling down now and saying, well, we're going to redefine violence because they disrupted the economy. So that's violence. What I'm saying is that instead of ignoring it, right, or admitting fault and moving on with the trucker convoy backlash and freezing the accounts of people who contributed money to the protesters' cause, he's doubling down and saying, no, we were right, we're going to do it again. I'm saying that it might not be tomorrow. And I said I'm not the guy that's wearing the sign, that walks around with the sign, the world's going to end tomorrow. But I think in America, too, as far as the pipeline protesters, as well as January 6th, the January 6th draconian decades in jail for fucking what should have been disorderly conduct, basically. They should get maybe some of those guys should get 60 days or a couple of months, 6 months, but 60 years, 50 years. It's insane. They're going to do the same thing to the lefties, just like they did to the right wingers of January 6th, and nobody wants to see that. That's what I mean by I think we're entering the final phase. The Rubicon has been crossed, and they're ready to come out with the tanks by the police, not just the gun. The cops won't do it. It won't be the military. It'll be cops with tanks and crackdowns and all this ID stuff where they're going to have credit scores and shut down your account if they don't like what you say. It's all they're going all the way with it. I think we're going to see some crazy shit in the next couple of years.
Take definitely an interesting take. Do you think that it's going to work? Do you think they're going to take Jordan's license, or do you think he staved off? What do you think?
I think he'll win, and I think it's because I think he'll win. First of all, here's the thing: he's got to fight this. He's not gonna be like, all right. He'll never sign that shit. He'll go and live. He'll be an expat in some other country first. I guarantee it. So he'll stand and fight. Yeah, I'm saying he'll stand his ground. You know what I mean? But if it's like jail or flee, he'll flee. Or maybe he'll go to jail, but he'll go to jail first. I
don't think we're doing jail first. But yeah, that guy, when he was in trouble for the thing that originally got him famous for the pronouns people wanted to use, he had this little speech where he basically said, it's like, if you want to fire me, go ahead. If you want to put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this.
Right.
He's got that he's got a little bit of that spirit in him. So I think either he's gonna win and they're gonna back off, or he'll do the retraining and he'll just like make it public. It seems to be the two options that I see here. Either way, kind of got him in a corner where he's basically gonna win.
Right. Yeah,
that's right. His life training. He's basically good. and does it makes it hit and legitimizes PR, and if you look somewhere else, see, I'm sure that
You're breaking up. I don't know about other folks.
wins. So, the CPO was right.
I don't know if other folks can hear you good, but you're breaking up here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, chat's saying that they can hear me. Yeah. Lance, can you hear me, dog?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry. It's just I can't do anything about the connection. You know, sometimes God, or I don't know, maybe it's Elon Musk's fault, decides to give us a bit of bad weather.
Yeah, I have crappy
Again,
service where I'm at, and it's a glitchy app and not good service here. So it's yeah. So
yeah. Well, next week we'll be back to our normal stuff, but I think we're okay. Again, this is going to be my last question for you: is do you think that the CPO's concerns are legitimate, or do you think that they're just political, and why? I'd love to get your take on this.
wait, the concerns about what they're saying that Jordan Peterson did that was bad?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I care. What was it briefly in a nutshell? I read it, but it was
Well,
briefly.
he had lots of complaints. There's lots of complaints. We were going to go and through them. One of them, he said that this guy was welcome to leave, who was worried about overpopulation. He's making a suicide joke. He said the things about Ellen Page or Elliot Page, and
Right,
about
I
how
know
that
that
was
one.
bad. He talked about, yeah, I think he's called himself an evolutionary biologist at some point, which you could argue is a misstatement of his credentials, depending on the sense he meant it in. Um,
Yep.
and then there's a lot of stuff who just got mad at him for calling one of the Canadian politicians a prick. They got mad at him. They said it was unprofessional, which I think is the funniest one. So like, that's the long and short of it. We're going to be going through the rest of the complaints for the rest of the show, but like, do you think that this is real? Do you think that the CPO is being legitimate and above board, or do you think it's political, or do you think it's a little bit of both? I'm just
Yes,
curious
I
for
think
your
it's
thoughts
part of
on
a
this.
coordinated effort to pick and choose who they're going to go after, and they're going to go after it just like they're doing with the doubling down after the fact of this trucker thing. So yeah, I think it's 100% political. It's not even 1% good faith. 100% political, and I don't know why they're going after him particularly, but yeah, 100%, 1,000%.
Okay. Well, thanks for your take, mate. Appreciate you,
Right,
Lance. Have a good one.
and think about it, right? Jordan Peterson is considered to be kind of a darling of the right, which I don't think. I think it's kind of ridiculous, but but in a way, I can see it. Sure, okay,
No,
fine,
he is.
great,
No, he is.
all
Jordan
right,
Peterson
right.
himself is not like super right
Okay,
wing,
so
but the right wing loves him.
it's no
Yeah.
it's no coincidence. It's no coincidence that Trudeau now again just recently said the trucker convoy people were fascist, they're misogynist, and they could have been rapists and violent. And Jordan Peterson's a darling of the right, so it's of a piece. Of course, they're not going after any left wing radicals or whatever. So yeah. No, it's obviously so perfectly political. But I got to go anyway, so I'm going to hang up and then maybe call back. But as far as that other thing, man, reach out, because I got some. I've been noodling around
I know.
about a specific debate idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I've texted. Yeah, we'll get to it. Promise.
Yeah. All right, cool enough, man. But good talking to you, buddy.
Good talking to you. All right.
All right.
Thanks, Lance. Sheila, you're gonna have to put me in. Sheila, I'll let you back in if you put in chat that you're not driving anymore. I love hearing from you, but the technical issues kind of kill the show flow. So put it in chat when you're not driving or when you're somewhere somewhat stable, and I'll let you in. I promise. All right. But until then, I think I'm gonna have to limit you to participating via chat. I think any other way to do it, I just don't want to, sacrifice the flow of the show. Vlad, we'll get to you in a second. I'm going to read this next complaint. This person, Peterson writes, note that this particular complaint falsely identifies herself as a client of Jordan Peterson's. She was not the client. This is a theme, by the way. Most of these complaints, people lied about being his clients, which maybe implies something about what exactly counts as professional, what falls under the CPO purview. If all of these complainants felt like they had to lie about being his clients, maybe that shows that the CPO's purview is pretty limited. or maybe they just don't know how the system works. Something to think about. So this complaint is pissed off at Peterson for a tweet where he is talking about the truckers, just like Lance was talking about. So I'm going to read the complaint here. It says that Dr. Jordan Peterson has openly opined that no Children's Aid Society intervention is required in a public review of the Ottawa trucker protest. The Ottawa Police Service has announced the participation of CAS and attempt to ensure the safety of children and their safe removal following any parental removal. Then there's the link to the tweet. The professional maturity and willingness to act in the capacity of a mandatory reporter is an important ethical component of the psychology profession. Thank you for considering this submission. Regards. So this is a little bit incoherent in the way that it's written, just because they have a massive link put in the middle. But essentially he's saying that because Dr. Peterson is questioning the idea that you need the Children's Aid Society, which essentially, social workers focused on like protecting children, he thinks that the idea that they needed to be at the truckers' protest is kind of ridiculous. And this person is saying that his contradiction to official institutions is bad, and also it means that he's not fulfilling his duty as a mandatory reporter somehow. So the tweet itself actually doesn't opine anything really, for the first half at least. I'm going to go through this tweet. Again, I put the link in the call-in chat. If you scroll, you can follow along. But the tweet originally comes from the Post-Millennial. It says, interim Ottawa police chief says that he is working with social services and the Freedom Convoy protesters to have children removed from the area prior to any sort of police action. So this was way back when the convoy was first happening. And they were trying to remove children before any particular police action. And Peterson retweeted, and he said, quote unquote, children removed. And then he asked how exactly, why exactly, by whom exactly, and sent to where exactly, and for how long exactly. Think this through, Canadians. This is a bad decision. That's all he said. Apparently, this was a violation of some ethical code, according to this complainant. I think this argument is really weak. I think that this has almost nothing to do with his professional life. I think he's basically arguing that getting kids out of the way is kind of an indication of the police's intentions going forward. And he has all these questions that he thinks should be answered before they allow kids to be removed from the area, presumably kids being removed from their parents. This is one of the weakest arguments I've seen. I don't, this doesn't hold water in my eyes. Anybody is, more than welcome to challenge that. Obviously. K-Dot says in chat, why would they cancel him? He was a good laugh. I really hate this hateful politics, but a good psychological laugh about a job. I don't personally hate his politics, but I don't really love the cancellation stuff either. We have Vlad in chat. We're gonna let Vlad into the callers. How you doing, Vlad? Good to see you.
How you doing, John? Good to see you.
Not too
Happy New
bad,
Year, my
buddy.
man. You know what? This is just a political witch hunt. Let's be honest.
You think so?
There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with the man. They've been after him for the longest. They weren't able to get him at the University of Toronto. He resigned, not forcefully resigned. They tried to get him there. So Trudeau's doing everything that he can, using all these agencies that
Wait,
give you.
hold on. You think it's Trudeau doing it from the top?
Of
What makes you
course,
say
yeah.
that? What
Why?
makes you say
Because
that? What do you think that?
he has a bone to pick with him. He's been he basically Peterson has been horrifically critical of Fidel Castro's son, which is Justin Trudeau. So if he's been very
not Fidel
critical,
Castro's son. Yeah,
I know, but a lot of people say they do, but that's a conspiracy
definitely
theory.
not Fidel Castro's son.
So they've been critical. He's been critical of him, and he hasn't held back, and he's used them in many of his shows. And I'm pretty sure this is some way, I'm going to use the government because that's what leftists do, like they did to Trump. And I'm just going to go after him and try to see if I could take away his license. In reality, you know what? He wouldn't even be hurting him. He wouldn't even be touching him, to be honest. So for him to try to go after him, it's just to give him a headache and a hard time. Because honestly, the day will come when, if this goes to court, since it's not a criminal case, it's about his licensing, they have to prove without a shadow of a doubt that they have the people that are accusing him of wrongdoing. And so what they're trying to get him at is political thought as a crime, and that's illegal anywhere. You cannot be. That's what communist governments used to do. Oh, look, they say used to send people to the Politburo and stuff. You're a counter revolutionary because you said something offensive or something, you that didn't go along with party lines. So what do? They start going after you. No different than the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. So really, they're just going after him to give him a hard time. They know he's doing
Okay.
well. He's loved, and he has a lot of work to do, books to write, and many conferences and many speaking, opportunities here in the U.S. and Canada and around the world. Yet all they're doing, all they can, is to try to go after his license. Which really, if he's not using it, he could easily give it up. But you know what? I would much rather see him put up a fight and duke it out and see how they could go, and then sue them for
So
millions of dollars
Vlad,
because they go ahead.
I think I'm gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate. It hurts me a little bit to play devil's advocate, but I'm going to. Um, I think that it's pretty unquestionable that there is a political element to this, but that doesn't mean that it's not also legitimate per se. And I think that there have been some decent arguments that he has technically broken rules in regards to his speaking about suicide, maybe in regards to him calling himself an evolutionary biologist,
What,
in a
what's
vague
wrong with
sense.
having what's wrong with having a difference of opinion of speaking about suicide? What's wrong about being an
Well,
evolutionary
it's
biologist?
wrong because he's a well, it would be wrong in the sense that he's being accused of meaning it. It's wrong because he's a clinical psychologist and his license
Okay.
comes from an institution that has rules regarding how its members talk about suicide. And so, again, if you're going to construe this as an encouragement of suicide, which again, I don't really think is a good argument, but if that were true, then you could see how, okay, he actually did violate his rules. He needs to be retrained on how to talk about this, especially in
But
public.
that's
Does
not
that
that's not what
argument
they
hold
want to
water to you or
retrain him.
not?
Yeah.
Huh?
No, I don't agree. I don't agree because they said it very clear. They want to retrain him, re-educate him regarding what he's saying social media. So basically, they have a problem not because of his clinical profession. He wasn't necessarily at that moment a clinician. That he had someone he was looking at, a client, right? He was listening to and going over their problem. That's not even the case. He said something online on Twitter or any of the forums that he uses, and they didn't like it. He said something on Daily Wire. They didn't like it. He said something that didn't go with them. That's not part of their left wing ideology, and they didn't like it. So now they're going. Really, it's a political witch hunt. It's not about his professional or lack of professionalism or anything. They just
So
don't
you
like
just
the
don't
guy
buy it.
that he doesn't. They just don't like the guy that he doesn't line up with them. That he's not doing their
So if
bidding.
I'm hearing so if I'm hearing you correctly, you just don't buy it. You think that it's just
I don't
pretense.
buy it
Am I
whatsoever.
understanding you correctly?
The man has
Yeah,
become successful. The man is back on Twitter. The man is with Daily Wire. The man makes about $1 million a month. They hate him because he's successful and we love him. You love him too, John. You know he's your hero. He's my hero,
yeah.
brother.
Okay, well, so yeah, again, full disclosure, Peterson is the guy who got me into this side of the internet. He's actually what brought me into the Pangburn server. So yeah, I
Mhm,
like him quite a bit, but I also, I have how I feel and then I have what I think, and those aren't completely separate, but they're somewhat separate.
mhm.
So yeah, I yeah, so
And
I
and
can't
and
fully
and I
take
know I'm
that.
going to be biased. I know I'm going to be favoring of cars.
Yeah,
But
last
let's
thing.
be honest. He's done more good than bad. But they just hate the man because he's doing good and he's good at it. He's become successful and he's open minded and he speaks his mind. And that's why they hate him. They want to shut him down. They're not going to be able to shut him down. I'll tell you that. They're not. I hope he takes it to court and fights him and sues them for millions of dollars. That's all I got to say. Thank you, John. Have a great day, brother.
No win scenario for CPO. Peterson is too popular. He's too big. If he takes his license taken away, he's not really using it that much anyway, and it just turns him into a martyr. It further delegitimizes them. On this show, we try to assume good faith on behalf of all actors, but when there's this pattern of like institutional targeting, it's kind of hard to do so. It's kind of hard to. It makes it more difficult to assume good faith when it's kind of a pattern. Um, but that doesn't mean we abandon that. So again, we're trying to assume all the good faith we can on both parties. I will say though that Peterson, actually, you know what? We're gonna go to next callers. We're gonna go to Lance. You're gonna have to be quick because Dan's waiting in queue, and I want to get to him because we disagree, and I think we have a good combo. I'm gonna go through the next complaint. Just so we can keep making our way through and making progress while we're also doing our callers. So this complainant, according to Peterson, also falsely identified herself as a client of mine. This person said she was a client of Peterson and she wasn't. And her complaint is as follows. It's very long. It is very long, so I'm going to breeze through it. I promise you, I'm not misrepresenting. It's just very long. Um, this person says, I am writing to request that the college establish whether or not Dr. Peterson has violated the college standards or regulations during his 4-hour-long interview on the Joe Rogan Experience, episode 1769. Especially those relating of the provision of information to the public, as well as to regulations governing the promotion of professional practice on his website. Peterson is a guest on the show and is being lauded for his professional position and credentials. Um, Dan, Rogan always introduces people by their credentials, so we call the clinical psychologist on the show. He is not on the show presenting his personal opinion because of this presentation of credentials. There are so many ideas or statements or supporting evidence presented, which would take hours to fact check. Okay, so nonetheless, I have outlined below statements made in the first hour, which I perceive to be problematic, unethical, or unprofessional to below. Okay, so she argues that he says things that she thinks are wrong, problematic, unethical, professional, but she also acknowledges that he offers supporting evidence, which makes it seem like he might like genuinely believe these things and can back it up. Whether or not there's disagreement, like disagreement is allowed. I'm pretty sure if I'm remembering the rules correctly, Dan will take me to task if I'm not remembering them correctly. I think it's willfully giving false information. And you know, if he's providing us supporting evidence, then it's not willful. He just believes this stuff, and he might be right. And she might be wrong. Anyway, going through. Nonetheless, I have outlined below statements that I think is problematic, unethical, or unprofessional. In addition, this article makes reference to Dr. Peterson's clinical work. I am unclear whether Dr. Peterson has suspended his clinical practice at times when his own mental health and addiction issues were sufficient as to render his practice unethical. Yeah, he did. He hasn't been doing clinical work for a long time because of his fame and also because of his personal medical issues. That's very published. He has not been practicing for a long time. If he had, I think CPO would have been after him a lot earlier. Then she says, this is the fun part. Furthermore, I have my own concerns about Dr. Peterson's mental health status during the Joe Rogan interview, as there is ample evidence in the hour one I reviewed of his being disinhibited, tangential, circumlocutory, and grandiose. Um, she's arguing that basically because Peterson like uses quote unquote word salads, something that I've never really understood by the way, because I've always been able to understand him. Maybe that's just because I've been watching him for a long time, but basically she argues that the entirety of the Joe Rogan podcast, because of the way that he speaks, indicates that he is of like incompetent mental health, which is pretty fun. She says that I have spent many an hour with unwell clients, and if any of them had made these statements, I would have been speaking with a psychiatrist about their stability and need for potential admission. That's amazing. So this person's a psychologist. She says, as a psychologist, I am appalled by Dr. Peterson's behavior and the impunity with which he feels he can pontificate on areas well outside his areas of competence. Um, yeah, I don't really understand this one. Because if it's not within his area of expertise, i.e., clinical psychology, then it's also not within the CPO's purview to mess with him on it. And if it is, then he can't be upset about his impunity to talk about stuff he doesn't have expertise on because he does. That's why they're after him. Um, she says that he is embarrassing and undermining the profession, blah, blah, blah. She just says that he's embarrassing. Um, da, da, da. There's a lot more here, but it's kind of hard to get through. There's a ton of links stuck in. That's basically that's the long and short of it, of that complaint. Again, this person lied about being a client. All right, so that one's fun. He basically says that he's mentally ill and that he says stuff that he thinks is wrong and problematic and unethical. She has some links to the stuff that he thinks is wrong below. Um, Um, yeah, but she does admit that he has supporting evidence. Um, I could go through all of this, but again, it's long. I think we'll get to the second half of this complaint after we take our next caller. So, Lance, you've already been on. What are you thinking? Do you have something extra to add?
Oh yeah,
What do you
yeah.
think?
Just a brief comment. So
Beautiful.
Vlad was talking about Nazi Germany. According to like Chomsky, he had just people that I respect a lot. What Nazi Germany, even compared to Germany or Mussolini's Italy, the East Germans after World War II had the most pervasive 1984, like cameras everywhere. They had everybody snitching on everybody in history until right now in America. Okay, it's like that was the worst ever in terms of just surveillance. Also, so that's all I was going to say was this though: the Gestapo, right? When they wanted to pull the wool over folks' eyes, when they couldn't do it, they would shoot one. They would shoot one of their own. What I'm saying is Trudeau's being a fascist, but he's not being a very good fascist because they're only going after right winger, the truckers, Jordan Peterson. They're only going after people on the right. Dude, it's so transparent what they're doing in terms of being all political. And by the way, you are a good faith actor, and you did do the other side, devil's advocate, John. I love you, buddy, and I mean that in the sense we don't even know each other on call-in very well, let alone, but it's just a rephrase because I've listened to how you approach people, and it's always good faith, open-minded, all that stuff, regardless of where you're coming from politically. So I appreciate that. And so, so with Trudeau, they're going after, and he's supposed to be a left winger, but he's only so of course he's only going after right wingers. He's got to go after a lefty at some point, or everybody, even the shit libs are going to start seeing through his bullshit.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. I appreciate it, mate. We're gonna appreciate having on. If you want to call back in, please jump back in that carousel. But yeah, thanks. I don't really have much to respond to there. I appreciate the compliment. I'm gonna blitz through this end here. So here are some of her complaints. The interview in question originally came to her notice because of a Guardian article where basically Peterson. So in the Joe Rogan interview, Peterson makes some arguments about climate. Most of them come from people like Bjorn Lomborg, Marianne Tupy, I think Matt Ridley as well, who are all interesting thinkers that everybody should, read, maybe not agree with, but definitely read to get an intelligent other side, as opposed to, the stupid other side where they say that climate change doesn't exist. These people will say it exists, but, we're being a bit hysterical. Anyway, he makes an argument that climate doesn't exist. Now, this has been the subject of so much animosity. Dan is waiting in the callers. Dan, I will be letting you in. I promise. I just want to go through the second half, and we are going to talk about all of this. It's been subject to lot of animosity. Now, Peterson is not saying that weather and weather patterns over time do not exist. What he's arguing is that, as far as I understand, if you're interpreting it with a good faith lens, where you're trying to make the guy look good, which is what good faith is, by the way, trying to make everybody look good in the best possible light, which is how I tend to deal with everybody. And I think since Dr. Peterson isn't an idiot, you can safely do that with him as well. He says that climate doesn't exist, and he doesn't mean that weather and long-term weather patterns don't exist. What he's saying is that climate, as a term, kind of means basically everything in the environment, which is like too many things. So he thinks that the term climate change is a poor metric, because a poor word to slap on what we're actually talking about, since what we mean when we say climate change is a certain number of factors that are selected by the scientists to measure, like, carbon in the air and so forth. And it should be more specific as to what's actually being measured, instead of using very specific factors and pretending like those factors make up the entirety of what is climate. So when he says climate isn't real, climate can't be measured, that's what he means. He says climate's too broad of term. What we're actually talking about is something much more narrow, and we should be specific. So that's what I think he was saying. I think that's the most charitable way to interpret it. This complainant is saying that people on the internet disagree with Jordan Peterson and try to debunk him, which to me isn't really grounds for a license pull, but some other stuff. She talks about how it recommends nuclear power solutions. which I like nuclear power. I think he's allowed to recommend nuclear power. I don't know why that would justify a license pull. There's also a part that also has a lot of attention where he basically says, well, it's quote, well, it's just poor children and the world has too many people on it anyways, unquote. Joe Rogan was sufficiently appalled by the comment and he stated that you're being facetious. But the point is that Dr. Peterson was not, and this is evident in his tone and nonverbal communication as seen in the video. Yeah, that's stupid and wrong. Peterson was very obviously when Rogan said he wasn't being facetious, Peterson said he wasn't. And the reason he said he wasn't is because he was mimicking the people who he disagrees with, people who are heavily care about the climate, and who he feels that are anti-human, kind of like the guy he made fun of earlier, saying that you're free to leave at any point. So anybody who knows Peterson knows as that's not the point he was making because he rails against that point all the time. This person obviously does not know Peterson at all for thinking that he made that point seriously. He's actually making precisely the opposite point. Peterson also laughed at an experiment involving drunk monkeys. This person is upset about that for some reason. He says lots of things about communism and capitalism this person doesn't like. I'm sorry, this is just difficult to deal with because of the way that she's written it. He says that a lab rat is a pretty good model of a human being. That's something she thinks is wrong, even though we use lab rats to test things before we test them on humans all the time. He talks about Shakespeare. Yeah, again, you guys can all follow this link. It's difficult to read through the back half, but a lot of this is just saying that she doesn't like shit that Peterson is saying. Whether or not these amount to actual rule violations is the question, and I've been holding off on letting Dan in because I think he's going to tell us what rules I actually think we've been violating. Travis is telling me we have 635 people live with us on YouTube. Shout them out. Well, I certainly will. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for all listening. Love you guys. One guy on YouTube chat is saying it's so 1984. Another is saying that Jordan was nuanced on his comments on climate change. Be Skeptical is saying that Jordan is based. Yeah. He puts a lot out there with Bjorn Lomborg on the climate. Yeah, he does. So yeah, do you guys think this is really really good grounds for a licensure poll? That is the good question. So we're gonna let Dan in right the hell now. He's been waiting oh so patiently. I'm sure he's just bursting. Dan, we've been talking quite a bit online, buddy. Nice to hear your voice again. How you doing?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. No, it's
Your
nice
mic
to hear
is
your voice
probably
too.
better than mine. Your
That's
mic is
all
probably
right.
better than mine right now.
Yeah, that's what happens when you play music for like 15 years of your life. You end up accruing some musical equipment and using it. So
Yeah, well, I'm on the wrong side of the country. When I'm back on the proper side, I'll have a better setup.
what's
But
the
yeah,
proper
Dan,
side? What's the wrong side? No, we gotta parse that out first.
that's are you trying to dox me, Dan?
Of
Is this what
course,
you're
of
trying to
course,
do?
of course, of course.
See, if I tell you which seaboard I'm on, I'm definitely gonna get found.
I mean, of
It's
course.
such
How
a
else is a
secret
Mossad
area.
gonna get you, right?
Yeah. Okay, so Dan, you've actually made some arguments in the Discord that I thought were compelling, and there's two. Is
Okay.
one, the one about him saying that he's an evolutionary biologist, I think is bad. I think that again, playing defense attorney, it's kind of up in the air in which term he meant it. Whether he meant it, it's just something that he's like, it's how he thinks and it's what he focuses on, as opposed to being an actual credential. It's probably his responsibility to clarify what he means. So kudos there.
Yeah.
And then you made another point. I don't know if this was you, but I thought the suicide argument was like okay. I didn't love it. I don't think it really works, but I think it's closer to being real. But yeah, please tell me what rules. I mean, we have 4 questions here, and I'd love to get your thoughts on all of them. Is it
4
good that
questions? Okay,
Peterson is
sure.
getting? So here's the 4 questions. We came with
Okay.
them at the top of the show, but I'm going to give them to you. In the abstract, let's
Can we
forget
do
about
one by
CPO.
one? Can we do one by one though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's the first one. In the abstract,
Yes.
forget CPO, forget the rules. Do you think it's good that Jordan Peterson is people are attempting to rein Jordan Peterson in some way? Do you think that's a good thing?
I believe
That's
that
number
anyone I believe that anyone in a position of power should have eyes on them, should be held accountable to generally a higher standard than most people.
Sure.
And I think that anytime anyone in a, whether it's legitimate position of power, a public official, or a monetary position, or a public figure, it's good that they're being railed in, and the public kind of can demand of them specific behaviors. I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, so I actually agree with that, and that's going to come into play when we get over down to question 4, which I actually think is like the last silver bullet argument as a defense attorney. I think it basically beats everything, but we're going to get there
Okay.
eventually.
Sure.
So question 2 is what rules do you think that Dr. Peterson actually violated, and how exactly?
So
do you think
there's
he did
two
that?
things. When we look at what rules, you're giving me a little bit of feedback, and then like it's double speaking me, and I'm having a hard time speaking.
Dan, you're cutting out a little bit. Chat, is it me or is it him? Can you hear Dan?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello? Okay, you're
Yes?
back. We're good.
Yeah, I was
Can you
going to
hear
tell
me?
you that I'm having feedback from you, and it's making me do that like voice box thing where I can't
Okay,
talk because I
okay.
hear myself in a delay. I'm cutting it in and out for him. Am I cutting it out for you guys? It's the other side of the country thing. Damn, I want him to hear my answer. I don't want to just talk to you guys. Let's wait.
Okay, I can hear you. Hold on.
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're
cannot
choppy on your end.
No,
Does he look muted for you guys? Because he looks muted for me.
good.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Beautiful. Okay, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay.
Trav coming in to save me. God, we're okay. All right, give me your answer to the second question. What rules do you think he broke? I'm curious.
Okay. So when it comes to direct rule breaking, the ones about him being an evolutionary biologist and calling himself a neuroscientist are clearly rule breaks, but they're also not ones from the complaints, right? So like that's important to put into perspective.
Right. That's a problem, isn't it? Because that's
right?
what CP Ontario is basing their complaint.
They're not.
Their re-education on is the complaint. So that's
but they're not. But they're not just. They're not just doing it based. They're not, because think about it this way. Like I said, a public figure is out there, and you obviously start getting complaints about them. Well, you can have your investigation team kind of look over what they're doing. That's completely normal. I think I don't have an issue with that, but it's not one of the complaints. So what's interesting here is that most of the complaints to me were around other things. So for example, like the suicide thing. Did he mean it? Did he not mean it? Did it violate the complaints? Not really sure. Right? We're talking about the
Are you not sure?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it breaks the rules. I'm not sure if it 100% breaks the rules or not. Right? That's a really gray area.
Hey, that's reasonable doubt. That's enough for me.
But this is where this is not a courtroom. And Jordan Peterson isn't.
How I think. I mean,
yeah, but Jordan Peterson isn't up on trial. And even in the courtroom, there's difference between like beyond a reasonable doubt, preponderance of the evidence, right? There's all these different metrics depending on what the crime is. And what the organization is demanding of him isn't you lose your license because he said these things. They're saying whatever they would say to anybody else under their guidelines, which is an SCRP, Special Continuing Education Remedial Program. They're simply asking him to take some refreshers on social media communications, because it's true that Jordan Peterson's language is ambiguous. Jordan Peterson is not succinct with his language. For example, when he said climate change can't be measured. Now, I really wanted to push you on that point.
You didn't say climate change. You said climate.
That's what I meant. Climate cannot be measured, which means that climate change cannot be measured. Let's just be real. If I can't measure the climate, I can't measure its change. So,
sure.
Right. So to say that something can't be measured in science is to say it doesn't exist. I can't measure God. Why would I believe God exists? I can't measure this trait. Then this trait, for all intents and purposes, in science does not exist. So whether he meant to or not, he said climate does not exist. That is a communication problem. But these have been clearly over and over again failures in communications by a psychologist whose not accreditation, but the licensing organization which licenses him, in one of their guidelines is one of those things, to effectively communicate, right? This has happened over and over in his career. So I think to demand
let me
him
ask you this,
to take
just to clarify.
classes of how to social media properly engage with people isn't outside the question. This happens all the time to psychologists, all the time.
Well, let me ask you this, just to clarify what your argument is. Are you arguing that on the climate thing, that he actually did mean what I said that he meant, in terms of just thinking it's an overly broad term?
No, I mean, how am I supposed to know what I don't know what's in his head. All I know that he said, climate cannot be measured. When you say climate cannot be measured, you're telling me that there's climate change cannot be real because you can't measure climate. I mean, that
he explained himself like 2 sentences later, to be fair.
Which was, he said it's super broad, right? It's super broad. These variables are very this. So he's essentially saying that, I'm not saying that they can't try to measure the climate, but whatever it is they're measuring, they can't make sense of. And that's the same thing, just a nice way to elaborate on it. No, you put a few words here and there together.
He said that that it's too broad and there's too many factors to possibly measure. So the factors that they choose is the cardinal issue.
That's saying that the factors that the scientists, right, that these climate scientists have decided to measure are not valid. They're internally non-valid, right? Internal validity versus external validity. They don't even measure the thing they're attempting to measure, which means it can't be real.
Well, I think he's basically saying that it's like a nomenclature problem. It's not that you cannot measure what we think of as climate, like weather patterns over the long term. I think he just objects to the use of the word climate as overly broad and thinks it should be.
No, I don't think so. I think that's adding into the lines. I think it's very clear. I think it's very clear.
In front of me.
Yeah, let's go. You have it or no?
No, I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Well, I think it's very clear that when you say that these are the cardinal, this is like the card. He's basically, in the same way that religion uses cardinal rules as like a baseline for anything, he's kind of equating the variables that climate scientists use because they're too broad. And how did they choose them? Great questions, but don't assume there isn't an answer.
Okay, well, if you agree that they're good questions, why do you think that asking these, incisive questions into a generally, accepted scientific theory or consensus, why do you think that this is wrong? Why is he not allowed to question those things?
Oh, you're of course allowed to question. Okay, and?
Well, and how is it within the CPO's purview to talk about that? Because obviously climate change is in no way related to being a clinical psychologist.
No, but climate change is related to the scientific field, and a clinical psychologist should be able to be a clear scientific communicator. That's according to them. That's not according to me.
That's okay. Well, right.
And psychologists, as someone who studies psych, climate change and the effects of climate change are used by research in psychology about the psychological effects on people, and also the way in which we diagnose and treat. Right. That's also important. So.
Right. Again, those are also things that he is allowed to disagree with.
But you have to communicate it properly, right? They're not saying you lose your license, saying you have to go ahead and just refigure out how to communicate publicly. That's all they're asking him to do. He's not above the purview of any clinical psychologist. This governing body of the academia, that is also a governing body in Canada because there's elections here, from the associates and the psychologists elect people on this board who review this stuff. He's not above a governing body. He still has to be held accountable.
So, I mean, again, we're branching into question 3 territory, but I'm curious if you have any other rule violations that you'd like to point out at this point.
I mean, the rule violations is not speaking clearly, not lying, misrepresenting your credentials. I think it's like 6.6 or 6.2. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but the whole thing with the criminal physician, that Ellen, people can look at that as it's not a criminal thing, right? It's not a criminal surgery. So for him to say that,
not right now,
yeah, right. So
it's simply not illegal, right? He meant it as a term of like, oh, it's like that's like, he meant it as a term of art, saying,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the rule that he would be breaking if he would lose his license is not any 6 point anything of that. It would be like rule 1.2, which would be not complying with the decisions of the College of Psychologists of Ontario. That's what will make him lose his license. Not the thing he said. He's not going to get canceled for that. First of all, he's not going to get canceled. He's still going to have as much reach. He's paying on Daily Wire, right? But
yeah.
So
lost you, buddy.
You lost me?
You're back.
Am I here?
No, you're back. You're back. You just cut out for like a second.
What was the last thing I said?
You were just saying that he's on Daily Wire.
Yeah, he's on Daily Wire. He's not actually going to be canceled, right? He has a big reach, but him losing his license is not going to be because of the things he said on Twitter. It's because he's not willing to, follow the advice of the elected officials of his peers, because that's, I think, it works at the College of Ontario. I think psychologists vote for people to be on charge of this group. And if I'm wrong, someone let me know. That's what I remember seeing. And he just has to go ahead and comply with that. And it's not some like
here at the halfway mark between our so to touch base here at the halfway mark in our 4 questions. I thank you, because you've given me a way of looking at the CPO in a good faith manner that I did not think of before. Which is basically, they're not after him for what he said. They're basically after him for speaking in word salads. That's literally why they're after him. They're like, look,
and that's literally what they said. That's what they cited. And that's exactly what they cited.
Okay. Right. So this is why I personally would like, so maybe that's their actual motive. I'm leaving the door open to that. Now, obviously I have my biases and I see patterns, and I like, it's in my nature to think that this is kind of a witch hunt, but I recognize that there's no evidence for that. I would love for the re-education, or the retraining rather, to be public so he can see what he actually goes through. That would be cool. I would like to see that, because maybe it is exactly what you said. Maybe it is innocuous and he's like, hypersensitive to this stuff because of his history.
I mean, I would say go for it. I would say go do the classes. Let's say they don't want him filming them. Fine. You take notes. You have to take an exam. Take notes. Relay it back to on your podcast. Like, it's not, they have not made statements that he's not allowed to do that, right? None of that has happened yet.
They haven't been responding to him at all. Yeah.
I mean, because they have told him what he needs to do, right? Like, he can try to sue them. I mean, he said he's planning on suing them. I mean, if someone told me that they're going to sue me, right? Am I going to privately talk? Everything is going through lawyers now. You just threatened to sue the College of Psychologists of Ontario. You think they're going to continue to communicate privately with you? That's not going to happen.
What a mad lad. You gotta smile a little bit. That's awesome.
I mean, it's ballsy. It's ballsy, but I think it's kind of a show. I think he's making this a big show. He's not trying to deal with it discreetly. He's making a big show out of this. This is big news. Look, I'm being victimized. Right. Look. Instead of just dealing with this, seeing what's going to go on private, and then be like, listen, I've been dealing with this issues. This is their resolution. He's kind of without a resolution, without any type of peers like around him, or any type of jury, just deciding to this thing and sharing it over Twitter. I think that's irresponsible. On top of that,
so you're jumping into question 4, and we're gonna get there.
Okay.
My thing is that I think he is making a show out of it, but there's 2 potential motives. You could say that he's just a grifter and he's just doing this because he wants, martyrdom. My thing is, I think that he just does not believe for a single second that CPO is acting in good faith. Which is the assumption we're operating under right now. And if you assume that they're not operating in good faith and they're just going after him politically, then I think his response makes a lot of sense. So I think that's probably why he's making a show out of it, more than like knowing it's not a big deal and making a big deal out of it just for money. I think he probably believes that it's a bad faith action. Whether or not that's true, again, remains to be seen. But,
I understand. I understand what he believes. But I think that, you and I and people here like who look at this expect, a rational, detailed, like self-critical analysis from him, right? It's like he recently released a conservative manifesto where one of the first verities that holds Western society together is humility. Like, that's what he literally said. So I expect this of him.
Right. This is also a problem. We're going to jump to question 4. So question 3 was basically, if he did violate these rules, do you think that these rules are good and should exist as they do? I'm assuming that your answer to this is yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and they should, if they're taking it in the manner that you're talking about, where he should be communicating more clearly. I think that I've heard a lot of arguments about how basically he's not allowed to disagree on this stuff. He's not allowed to call political Canadian politicians pricks, that's unprofessional or whatever. And I think that if that's what the rules actually say, I think those rules are too broad.
I mean,
personally.
I actually think those rules are that's ridiculous, right? And I don't think that's what's going on here. We know what they said, right? The whole that's the thing that got me the most is when he published that. I was like, man, you look so poor. You look worse now that you published this. I was more on your side. I was like, listen, we don't know what's going on. Maybe not. But now I'm like, oh, okay, there it is. They're telling you why you're doing this. Why? What's the big deal here? Why are you freaking out? Can it be that the rest of your peers who went to university with you, your co-teachers, educators, and people who have your degrees and your credentials are like, man, you gotta just check yourself out a little bit, and he's not willing to do that.
Well, right, and I think that he is hypersensitive to this for good reason, but I think it's possible that it's misapplied in this particular scenario. Just given his background and given his fixations on free speech and that kind of thing. And tyrannical societies, all that stuff.
It could be possible that like Lance said, Trudeau is behind this, trying to take out his political opinions, right? But then again, also be lizards are running the government, right? But
well, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just true. What are you talking about?
Oh, of course, my bad. But
dude, Joe Biden sheds his skin every night. This is common knowledge.
He sheds his skin so he can get better memory, but that's beyond the point. It's he needs more blood going to his brain, but I think that the main issue is that the College of Ontario, right, hasn't really had any evidence of wokeness behind it. There hasn't been really any allegations. As a whole, the institution and their website seems to be super apolitical. You can even watch their committee meetings and their rules updates on YouTube. Everything is transparent in that organization. Every single meeting is public because it is, an elected governing body. So all of these things are super transparent, and I haven't really seen that out of them. I did a little research on them. I'll be like, is there even any evidence of this? But there isn't. But what we do have is tons of evidence of, public political figures like Peterson, Shapiro, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, all these people, when they get criticized, the first thing they do is they make it political. So I'm gonna go with the latter rather than the former.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna reserve judgment. I know where my instincts are, but you have presented a decent argument that it's possible this is all in good faith. So I'm gonna try to bite.
I think it's more probable that it's in good faith.
A little bit. Huh?
I think it's more probable in the same way that if we can't measure climate, the default position, it's not there. Same thing with God. Same thing with this.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I accept that particular burden of proof in this matter. But I'm gonna reserve judgment. But here's question 4, and this is, I think, the most interesting question. This is because
can I quickly respond to the blonde economist real quick in chat?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
You said they're super transparent because they're a government body, Well, when I say they're super transparent, I mean that what you end up having is that these organizations have laws about things that they have to put, they have to show in public. So, for example, your town hall elections and your town hall meetings, every single one of them is recorded and uploaded to the website or has to be accessible by a FOIL request. Well, Canada, unlike the United States, has a really robust website sphere. They all go through this civics websites, and they all have to have these specific websites with specific access to certain things. You can find some random town in Alberta and they're going to have a phenomenal website with their things uploaded onto it. And the same thing with the College of Ontario. So there's specific laws about transparency where they can be sued as compared to non-public organizations.
Basically, at the moment, there's just a lack of evidence that they're woke. The lack of direct evidence. Maybe some circumstantial evidence of just what the Canadian government is like and what these institutions are like.
I mean,
as a rule. Yeah. But in terms of direct evidence, you're right. There's not a whole hell of a lot of evidence.
And even if you quote when you see evidence of them talking about trans care, that's just because this is what the science is showing recently, and we can argue that point. But this seems to be a consensus amongst many scientists. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through chat real quick. The person before says, Gengar, catch me up on his language is harmful. I mean, the good faith position, the best possible way to read what's happening is that the CPO Ontario is basically giving him a social media retraining because they think the way he talks is too vague and is too open to interpretation that is not what he actually means. And that's the best way of reading it. The worst way of reading it is that they're going after his license because they hate him politically and they don't like his statements. But this is question 4, and this is what I think is the most interesting thing, because he put this in the statement, and it's in his longer defense that he has included.
Yeah, I've read that. I can go open that up as well.
Yeah, it's fine. There's more complaints here that we could go through, but basically he says, like, look, guys, I already have a regulatory network. He already has friends around him.
Where is that? What page is that on? What page is that?
Shit, I'm gonna try. I can point you to the podcast where he has a public conversation with these people moderating him.
Okay. Okay.
Where in the page I have to find it?
No, don't worry about it. If you record it, I'll just find it.
Yeah, it's on Spotify, and basically he has a network. He has people he talks to. Some of them are his family, so family doesn't matter. But there's also some people like who are moderately liberal who he says that he's been talking to, and there's podcasts of him talking to them. There's actually like one podcast that was released sometime in the summer where basically he has 2 friends. One of them is Jonathan Pazzo, and then one of them is a liberal guy, I forget his name, where they basically take him to task and say that his tone and the way he approached the Ellen/Elliot Page thing and the the overweight model thing is bad and wrong, and he should work on it. And this is an argument he makes in his his long defense of himself. He basically says, it's like, look, I have people around me moderating me anyway. I take my responsibility very seriously, but I just don't trust you to do the moderating, especially when I have these people who I like and who I do trust. So tell me where the benefit here is exactly. And I think that at the very least, it shows he's not being irresponsible, even if he's falling short. But I think there's also an argument that shows that the retraining just really isn't necessary, because he's doing very public and very transparent self-modulation.
I actually can't believe that you think that's a good thing to say. Imagine you put it this way. Why do I need a regulatory body? As a medical doctor, I have my colleagues in the hospital and those who disagree with me in the astrology and other fields, and they give me criticisms. So I don't see why the medical association needs to worry about regulating my practice. This is not how we do things. This is not how we do things in a democracy. It's not how we do things in a professional society. And when he signed up to become a psychologist in Ontario, he signed these documents. He knows the regulatory body over him, and this regulatory body exists for a reason, because self-modulation doesn't work.
Well, it's not just 2 things. I see your point. I do. And again, I'm just telling you what he was saying. I wasn't necessarily voicing my support.
Okay, my bad.
However, I do think it's a little bit different from regulatory body. Like, if he was saying that I don't need a regulatory body to, check in on me in terms of my actual clinical practice, I just have some friends who I like who can tell me if I'm being too mean to my clients or whatever. That's crazy. I get it. I think that
no, but his clinical practice is not just, he has upgraded. He has taken his degrees and went from I work individually with people to I supply the public with psych health information. I supply the public with things that my professional degree has prepared me to do. And he cites it over and over again.
Yeah.
And Twitter is not just his private chat with his friends over IM. It's his public-facing account. It's where he advertises his books, his lectures, his opinions, and in that forward-facing account, that is his practice.
But is that okay? Sure, but are you arguing that first of all, it's his only account? So are you saying that everything he puts on that account falls under the purview of CPO, or just only the things that are relevant?
This is where, and I think it's an interesting legal question, and I think that is an interesting way to go about it. But I think,
my inclination is no.
My inclination is yes, and I'll say because we say this all the time: don't mix business with pleasure. Don't get the two confused. Right. I think this is a very important lesson that, first of all, we have to have in our life as public individuals, social individuals. What we say in public, our face. This is a lesson. As long as this is in the Bible, this is from the meta narrative of the Bible, the Western tradition, the canon, as Jordan Peterson likes to say, where to saving face is such an important trait. in the Bible. Super important. Where even in the Hebrew words it says dam lapanim, which was blood. It's like spilling blood, because your face and your public appearance is a really important part of who you are.
Right.
And we have to have accountability when our face is recognized by everyone. When the things we say are taken as gospel by so many people, you can confuse the two. You really shouldn't be confusing this. It's irresponsible.
Dan, I lost you a little bit.
Oh, I just said that's just irresponsible.
Buddy?
Is the last thing I said. Yeah, I just said to confuse
I
the
got
two is very irresponsible. I don't see any way around it. And I think that, the College of Psychologists of Ontario have been like, hey man, listen, maybe they could be like, you can have a private Twitter, but you public shit's gotta be different, man. Like maybe they tell him that. Who knows? Right? Or maybe maybe they like cite the things you say. Maybe they have to tell him to make sure that whatever he tweets, he makes sure it's in line with the evidence, or speak in a way that almost like you're speaking to a patient with that, so they don't get confused.
Sure. Yeah. And again, if this is what the retraining actually is, I'm going to be a lot more conciliatory towards CPO. That's what they're saying it is. So again, if he does it, I would love to see if that's what actually happens.
If he doesn't do it, what do you think? What do you think if he doesn't do it?
If he doesn't do it, I mean, I think that if he doesn't do it, it's because he's so entirely convinced that they're acting in bad faith that he just doesn't want to waste his time and energy doing it. And there's no real drawback for him because he said that his license is more of a burden than anything because it means he can't speak freely. And it's just going to, it's just another point to be a martyr on. Now, I'm not saying that process, but I'm thinking that there's a very good chance he just doesn't do it. I think he wins either way, honestly.
I think he wins more if he doesn't do it.
This is true. He does. He probably wins more if he doesn't do it, but he'll win more points if he does it. And they're acting in bad faith. Like, great for him. And if he does it and they're acting in good faith, and he's like, "Oh, I was wrong," then to me he earns points because I kind of value that humility, like you say. But I'm not like I'm not really a great litmus for everybody. I don't think.
I hear you.
But I wanted to get to this. So I found the page. It's like page 38, where he basically says that I asked Jonathan Pajot and a Greg Hurwitz, who has helped me formulate and promulgate much of the messaging and strategy emerging among the Democrats in the U.S. in the last 5 years, parentheses, and both of whom had participated in the arguments about my conduct, to engage in a public interrogation of my behavior. They agreed to do so with some real trepidation. In consequence, we sat down for several hours to plan and discuss, and then for nearly 2 hours to subject my conduct to the most stringent of examinations. This was released publicly in the third week of August as, quote, mean tweets and apologia, which included as an intro akin to this letter, as well as the letter excerpts from the CEOs discussed previously. At the same time, I also debated my approach with a number of Canada's foremost journalists, many of whom have been operating effectively in the public sphere for multiple decades. So, again, like, I'm just defending his character at this point. He does seem to take this shit seriously. I think he's just completely convinced that the CPO is just not acting in good faith.
Yeah, to me, that's not taking it seriously. I can't see this.
So?
For me, this is like the free market is going to decide. My friends, my circles, the people who are talking to me over the mainstream news. This doesn't sound to me like someone who has, studied the sciences, is aware of like ethical behavior and academic peer review. It's about peer review. It's not about what your friends and what your these news anchors say. Imagine I told you, oh, my paper is fine. Well, some of my friends who might disagree with me said that the paper is fine. Be like, no, get that shit peer reviewed, right? So his conduct can't be reviewed by his friends,
right? But again, Dan, you keep making this comparison of like stuff that's absolutely positively in the category of his academic credentials, which is like like you said, paper, like published papers or his clinical practice. And this is what he's talking about here is basically his tonal approach to issues. Like the way he just conducts himself, like tonally, and like the word choices he uses to not be like, overly incendiary. And I think that I think that you have a point, but I don't think it's really fair to do a full one-to-one comparison.
Why?
I mean, what do you
why
think? I invite you to listen to the podcast because they
I mean, I'm sure they did. I'm sure I could even agree with them.
Yeah.
I could even agree with them. But that is despite the fact that I am somehow now trusting Jordan Peterson and his colleagues and friends to be his regulatory body. No, why would I trust that?
Body in terms
I already have
nice
people.
he is on when he like tweets shit on Twitter.
Yeah,
sure.
They already gave me the training necessary. I don't need to meet with the people who the College of Ontario believe I need to meet with. Well, it's not up for you to decide.
Well, actually,
I mean, that's what I hear he's implying.
Well, here's the thing, because at the very end of this, he basically asks a list of questions, where he basically says that he will further disciplinary process, but he wants these questions to be answered. So the way he says it is basically, I'm already doing a whole lot of stuff. Again, I'm speaking for him in the most charitable way possible. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, as always.
Okay.
But like that's the going wisdom of this show always, by the way, is for the conversation, and I'm always trying to like be hyper charitable. Just always be aware of that. But he basically says here, the way I think he means it is like, look, I'm doing self-regulation on my own in terms of like my tone on Twitter, which he already doesn't really think is super in the purview. But if you want to retrain me further, you're going to have to explain what you're going to do that's different or better. He has this list of questions. He's like, what's the qualifications?
Yeah, what's the qualifications? Yep.
Who evaluated
those qualifications and by what standard? Exactly. Of course.
Yeah.
So I think in the letter they told him. I think they told him in the letter. Let's go find exactly who it is.
Yeah, find the letter, because I think these are good questions. Because if the CPO is able, by the way, guys, I already put the link in the call-in, but this is on page 42, and basically he has this like list of questions regarding the process and why CPO is doing what it's doing and how they're doing what they're doing. And I think that if CPO actually comes out and answers these questions to a satisfactory manner, I will be like much more convinced that they're acting in good faith. If you find that letter, Dan, please tell me.
Yeah, I just gotta go find his original tweet.
Right. I'm gonna blitz through some of these questions that he asks. He basically says, with regards to the media coaching, what are the qualifications of the media coach? Who evaluated those qualifications and by what standard? How are such coaches educated? What is the documentation for the effectiveness of this education? How can a good and effective coach be differentiated from a bad one? What evidence will Dr. Peterson have to provide or will be provided by said coach that he is improving? So how will he know if he's improving in any way?
Did he delete the tweet with the letter?
What is the evidence that the coaching has ever produced the desired outcome? In other words, is the demanded media coaching program a genuine and recognized variant of clinical training, a known subspecialty with its own literature and standards? If so, who set the standards, when, and how? He's asking this basically, this is testing if this is in good faith or if it's just like arbitrary. And if they're able to answer these questions and show that it's like, yes, this is a real thing. Yes, this is a normal retraining. Yes, there's literature to back this. This is normal. Like, stop with like the schizo posting guy. If they're able to answer these questions, I'm going to be much more conciliatory to CPO. So I'm glad he's asking. I'm glad he's throwing down the gauntlet. There's another list. There's more lists of questions. But Dan, you wanted to come in?
Oh no, I can't find the original tweet that he made. I think one of them was deleted. I can't find it.
That's okay. I'm just gonna blitz through the rest of these questions. Dan, come up to speakers and we'll take the next caller because they've been ever so patient.
Okay. How do I come to speakers?
I invited you, but
I got it. Okay. Man, I'm a half boomer. Let me be.
I'm a half boomer. Nice. Okay, so with regard to the claim of media activity harm, this is the question B. List of questions. He says, what is the evidence offered by the college that this media activity has produced clinically relevant harm? Who was harmed? How? When? To what degree? How was that harm measured? Blah, blah, blah. Was the person or persons who were hypothetically harmed the same persons who instigated the complaints, or are we faced with a situation where someone who doesn't know any of the parties in question is assuming harm on their part and using second order inference to do so? So I like this question, but according to you, Dan, this might not be relevant. It might be less about harm and more just about the fact that he needs to be clear with his statements, in which case this line of questioning is null. But if they're saying that what he says specifically are actually harmful, it's not how he says it, it's what they're saying, and that CPO
Well,
just
so
doesn't
far they
like
didn't
what
say
Peterson is
that,
saying.
right? So far they
Yeah,
didn't say that.
if that's not what they actually mean, then this is a null. Then this is a null line of questioning. List C, again, I'm blitzing these. With regard to disciplinary procedures of the college has noted that given a complaint of misbehavior can be levied against Dr. Peterson, a psychologist in similar positions by anyone around the world, this produces a moral hazard to the college and a genuine, non-trivial threat to any psychologist operating on a widespread scale, as it means that the college's capacity to investigate can in principle be weaponized against any psychologist under college jurisdiction. What then are the steps the college takes, if any, to protect itself? The public it serves, whose right to the investigations of professional conduct should not be hijacked for merely political or personal reasons, and the professionals which make up its members. In other words, how does the college protect itself and those who it is responsible from representing on the professional side by being weaponized politically? Or does the college not regard this possibility or as a threat? And how was that decision that such weaponization was not possible in this case taken and justified? So this is an interesting question that I'd love to get the answer to. He's basically
Well,
saying it's like, I'm a really big deal. Anybody can levy a complaint against me. What is your filter to make sure that these complaints are genuine and not, just
I mean,
political
but
weaponization?
I think they say that on their website, right? They legally have to investigate every complaint, but they
Right, but
push
that's
the
crazy.
complaint. Yeah, but they
But that's
push.
crazy.
I mean, it's actually not that crazy. They legally have an obligation to you legally think about it. The police legally have an obligation to view every single complaint about a an officer, every single thing. It's just they have to. They're a regulatory
Right,
body.
but an officer doesn't have international prominence and international notoriety and political controversy
Yeah,
surrounding
but
him.
so they can look at it and be like, this is not important, and they have that. I think they
Yeah.
literally says on their website.
Right.
They have like I
Right,
mean
they do say that.
in the letter they literally have like a body that reviews this stuff. The inquiry bodies, right? The inquiry board, right? Report
Yeah,
from the registrar to the inquiries, complaints, and report committee, and they just
right.
they
So
wrote a whole
Peterson is
statement.
right. So I'm sure Peterson read that because, again, assuming good faith here. So I guess this question is basically, it's like, all right, congratulations, you have a body. Now tell me how it works. What are the steps? Give me specifics here. Is what I think he seems to be asking.
Okay,
I
so
like
we
Peterson
can go
better
to
when
the
he's
inquiry. We can
asking
look up the
questions.
inquiries committees, right? It's under section 79A of the Health Procession Procedural Code, right? There's a procedural code for doing this thing in law about how they have to do it, right? That's
Yeah,
what I'm saying. Like,
I
all
mean, I'd
these
love to see
things are
those.
public facing, like the how they're supposed to do it. I mean, if he finds out that they fucked with it and they did it wrongly, then GG. But
Yeah, GG, I guess. I like Peterson much better when he's asking questions. I mean, like, I like him overall, but I think he's better when he asks questions versus when he makes statements, personally.
oh god,
I don't know.
he
That's just me.
tweets so much. I'm scrolling through his feed just to find this.
I
God
know
help me.
it's crazy. It's really well. He's just retweeting a lot of articles. Um, last thing, regards to the not last thing, Jenny, you've been so patient. I love you for it. We are going to let you in eventually. I just want to blitz through these questions. When's a woman going to get to speak? Says Lithards. Yeah, no, yeah. I'm just censoring women. We're just misogynistic here. No, not really. Don't take that out of context. I'm just kidding. Um, Purple Pundit thinks that I'm right always. So just in case anybody was curious about that. Um, okay, D. With regards to the complaints themselves, how many complaints were levied against Dr. Peterson over what span of time total? What proportion of Dr. Peterson's media output has generated valid complaints? How were they measured and determined? Were any of the complaints received about Dr. Peterson's media behavior rejected as specious, which is something in the college's purview? What proportion of complaints were accepted and moved forward versus rejected as spurious or noxious or mischievous? And why were those dismissed? And why were those, if any, dismissed? Um, Again, this is kind of what we're talking about. He's asking for details on the process. And what, if any, counter evidence was considered that Dr. Peterson's media activity has instead helped people? Who offered the evidence and how is it evaluated? In other words, who, if anyone, made the case that the value of Peterson's extensive educational and corporate efforts to improve mental health, and how is that good evaluated, and by who? And then, was the harm claimed and judged in proportion to that good, and how was that measured and evaluated, by who and by what process and when? So this is kind of
So
an argument. It's like I talk.
oh, go ahead.
So I'm just gonna sum up. He's basically saying here is like, look, I've probably fucked up a little bit, but have you been differentiating between times where I fucked up and times where people just don't like me? And have you considered the possibility that despite my shortcomings, the good I put into the world far, far exceeds the bad I put into the world, even using what you see are flawed avenues to do so? And I think that's also a good question. I mean, what do you think, Dan?
I think that they're not deciding whether he's in good faith or bad faith. Honestly, I don't think they're considering that, and I don't think they should consider that.
It's not good faith. It's benefit into the world, right?
Yeah,
Because
I don't think that's what because they're not saying you're done. They're not saying you can't practice anymore. They didn't say that. They said that we want you to do the supplementary program that people do, and I looked up I found the post. They want him to do it with Dr. Erica Abner or Gail Siskind, who are probably the people who people do coaching with when it comes to ethical and professionalism problem. Why? If you go on Erica Abner, she's a PhD, LLB, LLM. She's a lawyer who specializes in ethics and professionalism. She has a PhD in higher education and work with individual and regarded professions who have experienced professionalism and or ethical breaches. I expect referrals from both regulators who have ordered that professional require remediation and from lawyers representing individuals who are in the process of responding to a complaint. In this capacity, I've worked with physicians, medical trainees, dentists, nurses, lawyers, and other regulated professionals. You can look at her qualifications. She's a part of the medical program at Toronto University. She also co-authored a bunch of books. And then the other person they're asking him about is a girl named Gail Siskind, who is, I think, a master's in individuals who have encountered challenges to manage their own conduct. Faced with possible limitations with their career or business, individuals can flourish by drawing remarkable, whatever it is. Self-critical, evaluate. I think the second one is probably less about the other one, but if you look at the about page, you can look at things about Gail Siskind. Qualifications, right? She's a registered nurse, MA. Yeah, she usually works with doctors who have publicly spoken about stuff and have gotten in trouble for it.
Well, the people seem qualified. I think that his questions about is there literature backing this? How will we measure my progress, if any? I think those are probably good questions.
I don't think they're looking for. I think they're not looking for that because they have a regulatory body who looks at this stuff. And let's say he does take these classes and he tweets something like Trudeau is an asshole for doing this, and they start getting him. And again, I'll be like, what's going on here, right? Is this actually violated? And then we can start determining it any further. But I think from this initial conception, I don't think it's anything out of the blue.
Right.
And I'll shut up. I talk too much.
No, it's okay. I love hearing from you. I will say that Peterson, he has more incentives surrounding this in terms of how he conducts himself. I would also say that we are completely in the dark to some extent. We only know what they've told us, and Peterson probably has a better sense or knowledge of the institution and its character. But again, this only works if you trust Peterson's judgment. So if he's saying that they're definitely acting in bad faith and they're saying that they're not, and all we have is word against word and we're in the dark, I mean, Peterson would have firsthand knowledge more than we would. But again, maybe you just don't trust his judgment. There's more questions here, but we've been talking for a long time and we've had Jenny waiting so patiently. Jenny, thank you for being here.
Oh,
thank you for
John.
your patience.
Happy to chime in.
What are you thinking?
I loved hearing the conversation. It was really great. I was recently removed as the board chair of a board of directors of a theater company for, quote, unprofessional behavior. So this is kind of a topic near and dear to my heart. Ironically, the theater professor who started the company just had an attempt on his life at his school, 30-year tenured theater professor, and a couple of his students were angry that he didn't use the correct pronoun. So the school wanted to get him gone, but he fought back. He's actually opened a lawsuit against them in federal court. But this notion of speech making it so that you should be canceled from your life, from a directorship of a board or a job or whatever, or kicked out of the organization that licenses you, is something that we all need to grapple with. But I personally think it would be great if Jordan Peterson said to them, yes, I will come in, I will be sensitivity trained in exchange for me being able to live stream this on the internet so that all of us watching could laugh, heckle, and mock this board, and it would provide tons of fodder for the meme makers in the coming months and years. So I hope he does it, and then just, like flips him off and says, "Who needs ya?" Goes off and does his amazing thing that he does with complete free speech, nobody deigning to rob him of his voice. I think that would be beautiful. So, um,
Well, I mean, I don't know about the heckle and mock thing, but I agree. My ideal thing is that he goes, he get all those questions that he's asking. There's more questions we'll go through. CPO answers them in full to the best of their ability. Peterson goes in, he records it, he live streams it, whatever. I prefer it to be recorded than for him to take notes, because then you could argue that Peterson is lying, which he's not. I don't think he would do that, but people will say that. I would love to just get a recording to see what's really up, because like what we were saying, we don't really know
yeah,
anything. We just really know what we've been told.
that's
And these
right.
complaints are, and as me and Dana have actually agreed, most of these complaints are kind of weak tea. To be
Well,
honest, most of them
let
are
me say
complaining
this,
about
John.
content,
If
not
they could
about form.
if they could muster the level of angst that they have around this man, for the psychologists out there in the schools all over North America who are working with children behind their parents' backs to transition, have top and bottom surgeries, take puberty blockers. If we could muster that same sort of angst, towards those psychologists, then I might be able to say, hey, yeah, go ahead, go after Jordan Peterson for a few mean tweets and some questionable behavior. But there's no acknowledgement that that's problematic in most of these psychological circles. And even though we've had England say, okay, we're going to cut off a date when you can do the surgeries, that's great. This thing is rolling over our kids that permanently changes their ability to have a baby, taking out the uterus, cutting off the junk of the boys. You're not going to have a sex life. You're not going to be able to live your life as a man or a woman. You are just going to be neutered to the end of your days. And
Yeah,
let's get some angst around that.
well, Jenny, it's interesting that you bring this up. On the Pangburn Hangout, we actually had a recent episode talking to Scott Nugent, who is a guy who transitioned, is now as an activist against people who are underage transitioning. So yeah, I mean,
There
this is
is
an
a
issue that's
growing group of people who have transitioned, who are speaking out. I think they're some of the bravest people in our culture right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm definitely sensitive to that. We'll probably do an episode on it at some point. But to bring it back, the as a conservative person by temperament, I mean small c, I don't mean politically, but just like conservative in general, my first instinct is to trust the longstanding institutions. But we have had a pattern emerging recently where it's very obvious that some institutions are ideologically captured, or like you said, it's like you're not being professional because you're not using pronouns or whatever. And when that exists, it makes even me skeptical of all of the institutions,
Right.
including CPO. Maybe and I recognize that's an instinct that I have. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe this time this particular institution is acting in good faith. Peterson is also cottoning onto this pattern when it doesn't really apply in this case, and all that stuff. So, but to
Well,
your
one of
point,
the
just
one of the
because it's an institution doesn't mean it's neutral. So
one of
again,
the
I would
things
love
that
to get
George
eyes in there and see what the retraining is actually like. That's really what I want. I want to get the information. I want to know what's actually happening, as opposed to what we can only do now is speculate.
Well, what Jordan Peterson brings to the table is this deep understanding of nations in decline, and how, as they move totalitarian, they tend to just go after free speech. He understands like nobody else. He's constantly quoting Solzhenitsyn and all of the great dissidents throughout the 20th century, and he understands the history. And because he understands it, and he's willing to speak out against all of this stuff. And when I watched him lose his mind coming off his benzos, I wondered. I watched a couple of videos. I wondered if he was even going to be able to make it back to full mental function. And he's been so inspirational just on that, the way he's kind of clawed his way back into the body politic. He's healthy, he's clear. And I just feel like him being canceled by his professional institution, that is just so pathetic and petty. You know, I like I said, I hope they do it. I hope they say, okay, you're gone, because it will be a mark on them. for where their hearts are and what their goals are. And I also think it's done to send a message to anybody else out there. Don't you get out of line. Don't you speak out too much or you're going to lose this thing that you just worked so hard to get. That's why I hate licensing. I
Well,
think
I think licensing is kind of important. And if they're acting in bad faith, I agree with you. It's pathetic, but we don't know yet, which is why I have suspicions, but we don't know. So I would like to see that firsthand recording would be great. Jenny, thanks for calling in. Really appreciate having you. If you want to hop back in, please do. But there's stuff going on in chat that I have to deal with, if you don't mind.
No, that's good. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Jenny. Appreciate you. Thanks for your patience. Okay. In chat. His name is Bassoon Saloon, which I have to applaud the name. And he is making a bit of a ruckus. So we're gonna read through what he's saying. He said that he says that Peterson is just one of many characters who are heavily profiting off of the culture war and political and social resentment and disillusionment malaise. Sad so few can see it. I don't know why that's sad. So sure, he's profiting, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't care and he's not helping. Feeling a very obvious fact. It's absolutely a culture. There's a lot of social resentment and disillusionment. And fulfilling about responsibility and humility and like Western traditions and whatever. The stuff that he talked. You're saying I don't think that anybody is blind to the fact that he's fulfilling a need. I don't think anybody is blind to the fact that he's making money. So I'm not super sure while arguing that like there wouldn't be if Peterson wasn't there wouldn't be disillusionment for him to profit off of, because I got news for you, that's not true. The reason people are disillusioned is much deeper than that. I told Bassoon to call in. He is let's check, is he calling in? Might tell you something. I don't know what it would tell you, that's up to you. He said that Scott says deep understanding. He got for those of you who don't know the story, he was taking benzos for pain management and he got physically dependent. And when he noticed he got physically dependent, he tried to stop cold turkey and it basically almost killed him. People I mean, I'm gonna give my opinions here. People who make fun of him for that are like fucking gross, in my opinion. Like he had a physical dependence, or even if he got mentally addicted, it's like because you don't like the guy, you're making fun of a sickness that he had to deal with, like a real struggle that almost killed him. That's kind of gross in my mind. But
I would agree it's gross. I think at most
okay.
It's just a sick.
Thanks, Dan.
It's just a sick tragedy, and it sucks. It sucks to be in that position. It's really tragic.
Yeah.
No one should suffer that.
Yeah, for sure. We're going through chat still here. Held up like a martyr. Yeah, I mean, there is an interesting thing Peterson saying about self-responsibility and don't be a victim, and Peterson often casts himself as the victim. He doesn't act that way in terms of his tone, in my mind, or like he doesn't really exhibit a victim mentality. However, he does frame as if he's being put upon. And whether or not, I think oftentimes it is. Maybe this time it's not. But I don't know. That doesn't seem like a real argument. And yeah, Dan says that Jenny was wrong, that he wasn't being canceled. That, again, that remains to be seen. If we're assuming good faith, he's not. We're going. G says, good point, John. Everyone profits as much as possible from a great many things. Real. It's wrong to hold him up as some sort of savior or cultural warrior or prophet. No, it's not. Jordan Peterson has helped a fuck ton of people. That's just very true. His books have helped lots of people. I can speak personally. His books have helped me. Maybe that gives me bias, probably, but it's pretty well documented that he's helped a lot of people. So, if like self-responsibility and humility and, the 24 rules he has, if you think those are useless, that's a you problem. So has Dr. Oz. So what? Dr. Oz says shit. So what to you? Who cares? That's a non sequitur. Why are you talking about Dr. Oz? We're talking about Peterson. Popularity doesn't mean good. Says Bassoon. Yeah, popularity alone doesn't mean good, but what if it's like millions and millions of people not just saying that they like him, saying that they helped him, and then saying that this part of their life is now better because they followed these rules. There's like millions, maybe if not millions, hundreds of thousands of people who have said that, who think that and believe that, at least according to Peterson and according to lots of YouTube comments. So, you can detract from the guy all you want. If you want to get more into this, Bassoon, call in. I like going to chat, but fundamentally, this is a talk show. So I'm not going to respond to you in text anymore. If you want to talk more about this, please call in. I'd love to get a station going. We have Litards who continues to talk about lizards for some B because it's entertaining. Bob says that Peterson has enriched thousands of people's lives with his book and seminars. What have you done for the world and making it a better place? Good questions. Very good questions. All right, Lance, you're back. Actually, Lance, hold on. Don't talk yet. We're going to go through these last questions Peterson answers, and we might pop back. Let me read these questions, Lance, and then we're going to let you talk. Trav says, remember to subscribe to the Pangburn Hangout. Real, do it. Subscribe to this call-in show. It's all. Okay, so Peterson has another list of questions. He says, with regard to measured disciplinary consequence, has the college considered the public harm that will be done to Dr. Peterson as a consequence of acceding to these disciplinary demands? How was that consideration undertaken? What were the deliberations and conclusions? Does the college recognize that the mere decision to proceed with a public disciplinary measure is in itself clearly punitive and will be publicly perceived as such? How is this fact of punitiveness measured in terms of its personal, professional, and public impact on Dr. Peterson? Quote, in other words, or parentheses, in other words, how is the punishment seen to fit the crime? This includes all the stress and time and effort and uncertainty that necessarily goes into mounting a defense against the college's inquisition, as well as the indeterminate and substantial financial risk. This is kind of an interesting one, Danda, and if you want to pop in, you can. I don't know. I don't think that this is actually, again, assuming good faith in terms of Dan's theory, which, again, I try to do always, even if my heart's not in it. Even assuming good that I think it's pretty obvious that people who don't like Peterson or just publicly will be viewed as punitive just because of the nature of people, because, we live in a fallen world full of, people who think bad things sometimes. And that will hurt Peterson in a real way and reputationally and stuff if he, kind of gives in. Even if it's not meant to be punitive, it will be perceived that way by a not significant amount of people. So I think his question is, how is this measured kind of fair? I'm not sure if it's convinced that's a reason to drop the whole thing, but what do you think, Dan?
I mean, it's a good question. How would this impact me? How do any regulatory body decisions to public decisions that they post on the website? You can look up hundreds of psychologists who've had this happen. This psychologist has taken this retraining. It's public. You can go look at it. You can look up Jordan Peterson right now on their website and find out the criticism, the decisions of the board under his page.
But at this point, it's a little bit bigger than that, right? Most
why? Because he's rich and public figure.
Huh?
Because he's rich and he's a public figure, so it's different.
No, actually, yes, but that's not the point I was making. The point is, it's different to go into CPO's website and find it, as opposed to this very public dispute.
He made it public, right? He made it. That's the crazy. He made it public. It didn't need to be public. It's not like someone. It's not like someone. Yeah. He made it. He could have just dealt with it privately.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's fair.
Can I say something though? I wanted to talk about the thing Bassoon said about the prophet, and I think there's something here. I think when we think of people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and all those and political pundits, right? We can't think of causal effects and systems as just linear one direction, right? So we have say A, which is civil unrest, which leads to B, people being anxious and worried, which leads to C, people profiting off that anxiety, and they profit off that anxiety by stirring emotions, and then C can have a retrograde effect back on A or back on C, and then there's a which can lead to D, and quote unquote the system keeps self-proliferating, right? This is how capital works. Uber, or I'm Amazon. I give them a product. They like Amazon, right? So of course profit matters here, as he is a part, and all news media from CNN to Fox News, they're all responsible for this.
In part, yes. So this is kind of interesting because while you're right, it's G is making the point now that he says it's not non-linear. Bassoon is telling me not to play dumb. You're playing dumb by being mute and not speaking. Haha. Anyway, you're partially right. Obviously, if you talk about it in an emotional way, it's going to further that worldview. But number one, I think it is still the case that even if they weren't there, people would still be disillusioned just because of the state of society. That is my genuinely held belief. Sociology is hard to prove, but that's.
I mean, but you can just look at system sciences, not even like sociology, right? You can just look at basic like biological ecosystems and how that works, even without like sociology.
Sure. And then my second contention is that while Peterson is obviously becoming more and more political as he goes, I don't think that he's really a person who's like a super big fearmonger. Not on the order of like, Alex Jones or anything. You think I'm wrong?
No, I think it's funny because obviously not like Alex Jones, right? Like,
right.
Obviously, it's not Alex Jones. It's like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad versus like, I don't know, Greta Thunberg or something. Their affect is on a different scale.
Hey, John, briefly, just briefly, did you see? I'm not going to chime in yet, but did you see the promo when he joined Daily Wire?
Yeah, it was big. Yeah.
Well, man, if you need anything more to say, I don't know who his mentor is, like let's say Nietzsche, so I'll use that as an example. He's got a lot more P.T. Barnum than Friedrich Nietzsche, let me tell you.
You think so? Okay. Yeah.
How could you at it not think that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think they just basically offered him a Daily Wire stuff. He said,
no, I'm talking about this whole thing about like, I am one of the most persecuted people on the planet, but we're going to fight back. It was this weird, like Stacey Abrams kind of like when she came on stage, like he was getting the Oscar or that he was doing a promo for the next action movie. It was ridiculous.
Well, that's the whole Daily Wire thing, though. The whole thing about the Daily Wire is like, look, we're small and we're growing, but basically there's not a whole bunch of conservative cultural institutions. We're trying to become one.
But you're missing the point, John. What I'm saying is, in other words, it would be like saying, and here comes Walter Cronkite. He is going, or 60 Minutes, right? Because they're infotainment. And now Dan Rather is going to be talking truth to the establishment. If they did a big circus thing like that, when it was Dan Rather and Mike Wallace for 60 Minutes, I'd be saying, what the fuck did these guys? We know it's infotainment a little bit. We know that they're witty, but it's real news. No, that's what it is now. It's celebrity and infotainment. It's got nothing to do with substance anymore, and it's rather childish and rather bemusing.
I've always thought that Peterson is kind of, I mean, more maybe it's less true now, but I've always perceived, guys, stop being hysterical. Figure out your own life first. Clean your own room before you criticize. Blah, blah,
well, no, but see about Daily Caller, it's not about.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me finish. Yeah, I'm just responding to Dan. To me, that seems like kind of profoundly anti-building. That way that most pundits do, that tell you to hate the world. I mean, Peterson does say like the postmodern neo-Marxist blah blah blah. Like he does do that. Says it's like clean up your own life first and then worry about the rest, which to me feels like it has a bit more of a non-circular flavor than other like fear-mongering pundits. Maybe he still does it a little bit, but I think it's a little bit different. Yeah. I mean, Dana, do you think I'm just defending something? Okay, Dan's not interested in talking to me. We're gonna go through this last list of questions, and then Lance, you're gonna get to talk, and then John, who's been waiting, another John. We're gonna talk to him, and then we're gonna be done. I know. So, Dr. Peterson notes that the current discussion around his media behavior is to be treated as confidential and not to be publicly discussed. So Peterson is saying that this is supposed to be confidential. I hope, according to it right now, which again raises my hackles a little bit and makes me tend to think that they might be acting a little bit more of bad faith here. But again, we'll see with how they respond and see if they don't do this. So he says, on what grounds is this mandate of confidentiality levied, by whose authority, and what is the justification for that requirement, both statutory and moral? And is it not then the case that the outcome of the disciplinary process can and is likely to be made public? And then why do some of the same criteria, not apply to the process itself if that process is deemed fair and appropriate and in the public interest? Basically saying that if results of the retraining are going to be public, why hide the process? If it's going to be fair and good, why are you hiding it? Is kind of his arguments here. So I hope CPO walks back on that one and allows it to be transparent. I'd love that. I'd love that. Yeah, again, call in, buddy. Finally, a bit of a hint as to his future plans. Dr. Peterson is not going to agree that he has, in fact, done something inappropriate, or that the manner in which he governs his social media operations and corrects whatever errors might be made in the pursuit, therefore, is inadequate or insufficient. Therefore, if the college decides to pursue any disciplinary action whatsoever, let alone more extreme and further disciplinary action, he is quite prepared, willing, and indeed eager to make every single word and detail of this entire process public in the most effective possible way, which will no doubt involve reading the college's letters on YouTube, as well as his responses, and will also rebroadcast this entirety in the same manner. Thus, if the college wants to walk down that road and take the consequences, then it might as well consider itself forewarned. To conclude, Dr. Peterson is not in the least convinced that the actions of the college are anything other than injudicious, prejudicial, and politically motivated, as well as surrounded by the deceit noted in this letter, and is more than ready to have precisely the debate about such claims that may be required in the most public of domains. Sincerely, J.B. Peterson. Yeah, I mean, in this conclusion, he's basically saying, if I submit myself to this retraining, it's going to be public, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no reason it shouldn't be public. And I think you're full of shit, and I think you're acting in bad faith, and I am more than happy to have that debate publicly, is basically what he's saying. So, yeah, I mean, Peterson's actions are all working under the assumption that this is bad faith. And while we might not have evidence that they're acting in bad faith, us personally, the layman, he is convinced that they are.
And he hasn't supplied their bad faith yet.
Huh?
He also hasn't
say that again.
He also hasn't supplied any evidence of their bad faith.
Not yet. No, I mean, like bad faith and evidence for. But you're right. He hasn't yet. Again, this is why I want him to do the retraining, and I want to see it. I am like, it's what I want in my life. It's number one, top of my Christmas list. I want to see this. I want to see it play out. Lance, hey buddy, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think all those points were so brilliant, and it's obviously bad faith. In other words, I think the whole idea of quote unquote retraining, and this is true of a lot of things, sounds a lot like reprogramming or Mao's re-education camps, and that's what they wanted to imply. They want to, and so this is actually thought control, because it's not we're punishing you for an act you took. In other words, forget about the substance, right? It's just like we're gonna reprogram you, we're gonna re-educate you, we're going to retrain you so that in the future you'll do better with. By the way, what the fuck is social media retraining? It was one of these theories that's been was made up like 20 minutes ago by a few people in some grad student lounge. Okay, so what the hell is it to begin with?
Lance, if you think they're acting in bad faith, I think he's speaking too vaguely. Needs to be clearer. But again, we don't know. We're not going to know until publicly.
Here's what I mean, John. Even if it's true, okay, that this isn't laws. This is rules that an organization, institution can have their own rules. Even if he 100% did something that broke the rules enough to
get it is law, my friend. The institution is a governing body.
Okay. What is?
The institution is a governing body. They act specific health regulation.
It's not the government, right? The Canadian government. It's an institution, right? A university?
Yeah, no, it's not a university. It's not even an actual college.
Oh, no, it's a think tank.
No, it's not a think tank.
Well, what was it? What is it?
It's a regular.
Let me quickly just read it from their main
just give me what it is.
What it is
is it a car? Is it a house?
The College of Psychology in Ontario is the governing body for psychological practitioners.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Psychological associates.
Okay. It's not the government. It's not the government. It's the people that control the psychiatrist rules. Okay, fine. He's guilty. Go away. Goodbye. Okay, I get that. I'm not arguing that point whatsoever on the substance. He broke a rule they don't like, and he really broke it. And goodbye, Jordan Peterson, from this body. What I'm saying is the whole idea of retraining, and this isn't true just with this. Retraining, it sounds like reprogramming or re-education. If you're guilty of a crime, what they want him to do is going forward to be retrained, quote unquote, to use, quote unquote, social media better. So what? He's supposed to, so what all these things are now with Jordan Peterson, what's happening in this country, it's beyond just free speech rights. It's beyond just your right to say something. It's your right to think. It's actually thought control. When you really break it down in terms of, so in other words, it's not just like we're going to censor you. We're going to censor you on the internet, and we're going to take away your rights to your bank account if you donate to a protest that's trucker pro. You know what I mean? So this is thought control. You can't think what you. It's not just about your actions. It's about having a particular point of view, because having that point of view does not make that you a violent person because you choose from 1,000 miles away to say, "Wow, trucker protest, good deal. Here's $10." Nope, you're guilty too. That's thought control. You see what I mean? Because the action, nobody's going to say that person did violent, but you have the wrong thoughts. That's what I'm getting at. This is beyond whatever the merits are of the psychiatric group. The whole way they're going about this, it's beyond the idea we're going to punish you for some misconduct. No, we're going to try to get you, and then see, it's not about him. See, you're a big shot. What about all the other that aren't big shots? They're going to think things and not say them. In other words, they're going to have thought control and speech control, but it's actually thought control.
Lance, I think you're right if you assume that. So if the retraining is not about saying, hey, person, you have to be more clear with your speech, you have to be less vague, you're being confusing, and it's important that you're dead clear, and they're saying that, then I think you're wrong. But if the actual setup,
but they said it's going to be a private session. Then we're going to go public with the decision. That's not habeas corpus.
No, Peterson will go public. No, if Peterson submits himself to retraining, like rules or no, he said he'll do that. But just let me finish here. If they go after him for the substance of the complaints, we didn't go through all of them, but some of the complaints, they're mad about what he said about Elliot Page or Ellen Page. They say that Peterson is being transphobic. They say he's like being body shamed. If they go after him on like the substance of his tweets, then I agree with you. Then it's just political. But if they're saying like, hey, guy, you need to be more clear because you have to be more clear when giving people educational, psychological information, then I think you're wrong. But we're not going to know the substance of the retraining. Do you see what I mean here?
Yeah. But is it true that they're going to do this whole retraining thing in private, but they're going to come up with their decision of whether it took, I guess, or not publicly? Am I wrong?
Well, yeah. So this is what they've said. They've said that it's going to be confidential, and then at the end, let me finish. They said that the process is going to be confidential, or Peterson claimed that they were saying that it was going to be confidential. However, I'm not sure if CPO has said that publicly. I mean, Peterson probably has contacts with them that's not public. I don't know. But even if they say that it is going to be private and the public, if Peterson submits to it, it's going to be public. He'll take whatever cost. And he said that at the end.
But forget about what Peterson does. If obviously they're going to make a decision after this, and they're going to say, no, you didn't. You were rude. You didn't take it seriously. So goodbye. In other words, we're going to know based on their action or inaction whether they say thumbs up or thumbs down. We're going to know. That won't be confidential. We're going to know whether they approve of the guy or not. And the fact that they're doing it all privately before the fact, when he wants it public, another bad faith action, regardless of the substance or the merits, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, desire to keep the process private while the results public doesn't reflect super well on them. But if I were to defend CPO, I could just say that that's standard operating procedure, and it has nothing to do with Peterson in particular. Maybe you can make that argument. Lance, thanks for coming in. We're going to let John in here as our final. Dan, you seem to be talking too.
Please, John, literally 5 more seconds. Listen to this. Somebody in the chat was talking about, but he's so loathsome and he's this social Darwinist. I don't like the guy either. But if you don't defend those that you loathe, if you agree with on merit, then you've lost democracy and you've lost justice. You got to defend, especially those you loathe. Defending people you like is not hard.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what I've been doing. I've been defending the CPO this whole time. Well,
100%, John. You know, I was responding to someone in the chat.
Yeah, I know. I mean, not the whole time. I mean, Dan introduced to me this way to treat the CPO with having good faith intentions that I wasn't aware of. And now my principles have forced me to accept this as the assumption for the rest of this show, which is very sad because I would have much preferred to just like lay into like ideologically captured institutions. But instead, I must treat people with good faith and assume good faith. So thank you for that, Dan. You make me so happy. John, the other John, last caller. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Colin's being a little bit.
Yeah, cutting out a little bit.
This is super weird. It says Lance and Dan are still talking, but I can hear you.
My app has Lance
yeah, just
gone.
go ahead, man.
So actually, I don't accept that they're acting in good faith, but I actually, to me, I think that there are a lot of side arguments that are being made, but to me, at its core, it's not about Jordan Peterson. It's about the scope of these regulatory bodies to police outside their mission.
Sure.
So a psychiatric, like the purpose of like the CPO or any sort of like professional body is to set the standards for like the doctor-patient relationship. And so unless the substance of his tweets are being like him holding himself out as providing sort of like psychiatric advice to people, or I should say psychological advice to people, it's not for these organizations. They weren't created to police general public statements. It's up to the public to consume and decide what they want to do. I don't think there's any reasonable interpretation of those tweets where you can say that those tweets were being made in a professional capacity as a psychologist to give advice to a patient. The complaints being made aren't even by people who are his patients. So it just seems like way outside their scope. So whether it's bad faith or not, it's just should not be considered within their jurisdiction. John, can you hear me?
That credential. If he talks about anything psychological, he's subject to their rule.
Sorry, John, I didn't hear you for the last like 45 seconds.
Saying a whole bunch of like they're going after him for like the climate change stuff, which seems like kind of remote from that. I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's a purview problem?
Well, sorry, the app cut out. Like, I really didn't hear the last, like, 50 seconds of what you said. I only heard, like, the last 10. I'm really sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. That's not your fault. It's being glitchy right now. Apparently, Dan and Lance are still talking. I don't know. But yeah.
So what's the claim that this falls within their jurisdiction? I'm sorry. Is that what you were trying to explain?
Yeah, so basically, the claim that I hear from Dan is basically, like, look, if he's going to flex his credentials as a clinical psychologist, and if he is going to be as public as he is and be like a public science educator, then he has an obligation to speak really clearly about everything. So, if he's going to give you information on clinical stuff, he has to believe it's right, and he also has to, be clear. But then the argument is something that I might disagree with a little bit, is if he's talking about like climate change, for example, he similarly has to be clear with his statements up to the CPO standards. And that seems a little bit iffy to me. Basically, as long as he's being a science educator, he has to follow their rules.
No, I think it's even iffy when it comes to anything psychological. Again, like these organizations set professional standards for when you're acting in a professional capacity with a patient. They're not designed for.
So the question there is, it's the last thing that you said, with a patient. What makes you say that? Why do you think it's professional capacity with the patient? I thought it was just professional capacity, period.
No, I mean that's why these organizations exist, so that like they protect unknowing patients from, or same thing with like, engineering, lawyers, like any sort of like professional organizations. They're designed to have this narrow scope of authority to make sure that the people in these professions know what they're talking about, meet these standards, and will act appropriately with their clients. And outside of that, they don't like get to look over like what books you write about the topic, and like, they're not involved in every aspect of the profession. They have a very narrow scope in what they're policing.
Well, let me be devil's advocate as much as it pains me.
Sure.
I think you could make the same argument that it's, and as a part to unknowing clients, they're looking after like unknowing audience members. It's basically anybody who is under the impression that the person is an expert, who is fairly licensed.
But then what's the limiting principle? Everybody's in the public. We live in a world where anybody can talk to anybody at all times.
Correct.
So we're just going. So that means by virtue of being a professional, you are governing bodies. They get to have a say over everything you say in public. As a result, there's no limiting principle there.
Not everything. Not everything. The devil's advocate would say, no. Well, it's good that you're asking for a limiting principle. Our minds think in a very similar way, but it would be not everything, just anything that is related to your credentials as being a professional.
What's defined as
everything
related
that
to
is related. So basically, anytime you're going to be talking about scientific matters, anytime you are going to be communicating scientific ideas, anytime you're going to be a scientific educator.
So I can't write a book. If I write a book, it's subject to this. That would clearly fall within the category, right? If I want to write any sort of book or newspaper article or editorial, anything I write, or communicate as a professional is subject to their overview. I mean,
well, if it's regards to like academic scientific matters, then to some extent, yes, they don't have to agree. But again, if I'm arguing for them acting in good faith, they would say it's like, all right, we might disagree with what you're saying here, but you seem to genuinely believe it and you supported it with evidence. The problem that they are contending happens with Peterson is that he's being really unclear with what he means and is therefore misleading people on accident, and he needs to be retrained on how to be more specific with his speech.
But he's not act. But these again, like, what is he? So like you just said, if he's speaking to psychological, like, how do you define that? Because if you look at the tweets, as you mentioned, several of them are not about psychology, and some of them are almost so loosely or tangentially related to psychological concepts. It's like there's no definition there.
The complaints are absurd.
But that's what I'm saying. Like his tweets are not providing, like, if he were tweeting out psychological advice to people, like, this is my advice for you, and they're like, hey, you should be really clear on social media when you're giving out advice. But you look at the actual tweets, I don't know how you could say, like, on what basis would you want some random professional organization to have jurisdiction over people being able to tweet like that? That's craziness. Like, I don't know.
Right.
That just seems like such a. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. The specific complaints suck. Like the specific complaints that we went through are dumb and they don't hold water. And if CPO was operating on those tweets as the reason, as the things that they were going after Peterson for, like, I'd be completely on your side. That's what I thought was happening. Dan has said that that's not what CPO is actually going after him for, and that's not what they said.
What are they going after him for? If not complaints, what are they going after him for?
For the clarity of his speech. They're basically going to say, like, look, you said
based on the complaints. Based on the complaints, like I don't know how you can separate.
Right, but it's not substantive. But it's not an objection to substance; it's an objection to form, which is different.
The substance gives them their jurisdiction. If the substance doesn't fall within their jurisdiction, the form is irrelevant. No, if the subject matter doesn't follow their jurisdiction, the form is irrelevant. So if it's not over a psychological matter, the form, who cares the form? He can be clear about non-psychological things as much as he wants. It doesn't fall within their purview. If he's very unclear about non-psychological things, why would they care? It only should matter if it's within the realm of psychological things. That's what you previously said.
Yeah, well, that seems to be not their purview. I think what they're arguing their purview is any level of scientific education that rests on your credentials. Because as a clinical psychologist, he's not just a clinical psychologist. He's a scientist. He's a statistician. He's dealt with academic papers in general. Now, personally, I agree. I think that their purview should be very specific to psychological practices.
Right.
That's what I would like.
If
But
Jordan
apparently,
Peterson
that's not what their
published
purview actually
sports
is.
statistic, if he published NFL sports statistic, and because he's a statistician, the CPO can then that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no limitation to this. Which is why
there is a limitation. That's not true, John. There is a limitation. It's just a really broad limitation. But there is a limit. It's if you're not like doing science education, then it's not in the purview. Like him calling a Canadian a prick, like a Canadian politician a prick, should not be in their purview whatsoever at all, for example. Which is why we need to see the retraining. We need to see what they actually talk to him about to see if it's legit or not. Because all this right now is kind of speculative.
See, I think it's the opposite. I think they need to justify why they have a legitimate basis for, it, because again, if it has to be based on, if they have to articulate why they believe his behavior falls within the scope of some sort of the violation of theirs. And from
They already
everything,
do. They have. There's a rule they have. It's in the 6 points, 6.1, 6.2, like that list of rules. They have a thing in their purview that's basically just called generalized professionalism, as a catch-all term. I think that rule exists. I think that purview is kind of broad. I don't really like it. That in a perfect world, that's not the broadness that the institution would have, but it looks like that is what they have, and it's what Peterson signed to when he got his license.
well,
So
general
I don't.
professionalism has those things have limitations. Like you can't, again, it can't enter every single aspect of your life, of your private or public life. It has to be related to your profession. So I still think the onus is on them to show that what he was doing was related in a substantive way to his practice of his profession, because that's what those governing bodies exist for, to make sure that the people practicing and actually working with people as psychologists and patients are doing that properly. That's what that entire body exists to do.
Well, I think I'm going to agree with you that it's a bit of a stretch. I think that saying that it's part of their purview to say that, any level of communication or science education that you do in your life falls under our purview. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I do think that that's what the rule says. And again, they're the ones who get to interpret the rules, funnily enough. So it's
Well,
kind of
I mean,
gross, but
within
I
the scope of laws. I mean, they don't have carte blanche. Any sort. I mean, I don't know how Canadian law works, but even they have to have some sort of legal authority. So at the end of the day, I'm sure there's some sort of level of legal review. I mean, if it were in the U.S., there definitely would be.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's a bit of a stretch. I think it's a stretch to begin with, and I don't really love the idea that their purview is this big, but it seems to be this big. It seems to be like Jordan Peterson is a very prominent scientific educator, among other things. And when he does scientific education, um, leveraging his credentials to do so, whether explicitly for psychology or more implicitly just as a person who knows what they're talking about in scientific fields, um, then he falls under their rules for professionalism. Again, I don't really love how broad that is, but it seems to be an argument that they can make based on the laws that they have, and they're making the argument to themselves. So, like there's not much we can really do. Again, I would like to end on this note that I want him to go do it, and I want him to go like record it, and so we can see it, so we can
Oh
actually
no,
prove whether or not these people are acting in good faith or not.
I hope
Because
he
I share your suspicions that they're acting in bad faith, but we can't actually prove it at the moment. I would like to get them dead to rights.
I hope he continues to fight it, because I heard, in the calls that there were, kind of some in like intimations that maybe, he's grifting or whatever. And I don't know, maybe he is. But the one thing I would just say is that, if you look on Twitter and social media, like this type of thing that's happening to him is happening to normal citizens. There was a guy who put in England who tweeted a video and then got a letter that he had to come to the police station to give an interview because I think it was like an anti-LGBT. He made a joke about like LGBT flags on the street and put a video on Twitter and had to go in. So, I think that this type of thing is actually happening more and more. And overall, where, whether it's the police or these regulatory bodies are really expanding their mission and their scope beyond, because what their original intent is, and becoming much more used to having our private behavior police. So I'm glad somebody as prominent as him, whether you like him or hate him or not, I don't care about him. I think that this type of issue, though, and the creep of government intrusion and the chilling effect it has on our behavior is the most important thing in this whole overall. And I don't care if Jordan Peterson goes broke or not, or whatever, but I think that this type of thing is very dangerous and scary. How normal, how much more common it's becoming.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that the generalized institutional creep further into our lives is very real. I think that there was a long march through the institutions throughout the 1900s. That's becoming evident now. I think that's all true. I don't think I get the carnal impulse from him to continue to fight the man, but honestly, as long as he does, then we're always just going to have this debate where we can argue about legitimacy, and I would just love for him to put the matter to rest by recording it all. That's what I would like personally, but I get your point. John, thanks for coming in, man. I appreciate you. Please come back next week, all right?
All right.
Hey, thanks, man. All right, everybody. This was episode 34 of The War of Ideas, the cancellation of Jordan Peterson. He's been continually canceled forever, but not by CPO. I think that we have determined that if you're assuming good faith on all sides, it's pretty unclear who's in the right. And I think we've all decided that we basically need some more evidence. We need to see what that retraining is actually like. Peterson's actions look completely erratic if you're assuming good faith, but he is not. He is under the impression that CPO is not acting in good faith and that this is nothing more than a political attack. We don't have the firsthand knowledge to agree or disagree. He has not yet provided evidence to show that. I think that's probably why he's considering doing the retraining, because originally he said that he was willing to sacrifice his license to avoid retraining, and now he's kind of come around to it if he gets to record it, and I think that's why. I think he wants to provide some evidence that he's right. So we're going to see. Dan, thank you for being here, for opening my perspective a little bit more. Everybody, please subscribe to the Pangburn Hangout. We have shows every single day. We have this show at the same time every week, which is, what you should really come for. And I just appreciate you guys all coming here and having a great conversation. This was one of our better ones. This was one of our better ones in the last month or so. It's very active, very engaging. Bassoon, you were very active in chats, but you did not come in to call in. I would have loved to have seen you. Bassoon Saloon says JP never canceled. Fake news. Yeah, obviously it's clickbait. I have to admit it's a bit facetious. But yeah, I mean CPO is going after him at the very least. Join us on Discord for the after party. So true. Pangburn Travis has put in our link. That is to our Discord. We talk about this sort of stuff all the time. We have lots and lots of voice chats and lots of text chats where you can talk to all of us all the time about anything. It's very fun. It's very good. Please join up. Please join up with the Discord. Please subscribe. Please come back next week. Loved having all of you guys. And loved having you all, guys. I will see you all next time in the War of Ideas for episode 35. Bye-bye.